Good evening. The night has finally arrived. Let the stillness of the room wrap around you like a heavy, warm blanket. Allow your breath to find its own natural, slow rhythm. In and out. There is no schedule here, no demands, and no noise. Just the quiet dark and the sound of my voice. Tonight, we are going to explore a mystery of confinement. We are going to step into a world of concrete and iron to answer a strange question. How does a man locked in a soundproof box, cut off from the light of the sun, manage to cast a shadow across an entire country? It is the story of Tyler Davis Bingham, a man they called the Hulk, a man who proved that stone walls do not make a prison, and that even in the absolute dark, a drop of invisible ink can speak louder than a scream. So relax. Let the walls of your own room fade away, and let's step into the iron shadow. In the sprawling valleys of California, where the sun meets concrete and ambition turns to ash, there was born a boy who would never know peace. His name was Tyler Davis Bingham, and from the moment he drew breath, the world seemed determined to break him. Sacramento in the 1960s was a city of contradictions. Palm trees lined streets where promise and poverty lived side by side. Families gathered in modest homes with chain-link fences and lawns that browned in the summer heat. It was a place where children rode bicycles until dusk, and mothers called them home for dinner as the sky turned orange and gold. Into this ordinary world came Tyler Davis Bingham, born to parents who loved him and raised him alongside an older brother. There was nothing in those early years to suggest the darkness that would follow. No prophecy carved in stone, no oracle's warning whispered in the night. He was simply a boy, one among thousands, learning to walk and speak and dream beneath the California sun. But even in childhood, something stirred, whether it was the restlessness of a young soul or the first tremors of a fate already written. Tyler began to pull away from the path his parents had hoped he would walk. At 9 years old, an age when most children worried about homework and playground games, Tyler Davis Bingham committed his first crime. It was petty theft, small enough to be dismissed as a childish mistake. A moment of poor judgment, perhaps, or the influence of older boys who should have known better. But in the world of law and order, there is no such thing as a small beginning. Every great fire starts with a single spark. And on that day, when the authorities took young Tyler into custody for the first time, something shifted in the trajectory of his life. The arrest was brief. The consequences at the time seemed minor, but the machinery of the justice system had taken notice. His name was now written in files and records, logged into databases that would follow him for the rest of his days. The boy who had stolen something small had become something else. A statistic, a case, number, a problem to be managed. For the next few years, Tyler drifted through adolescence with the weight of that first arrest hanging over him like a shadow. He returned to school return to his family, but the world had changed. Or perhaps he had changed. The line between the two is often impossible to draw. And then, at 14, came the moment that would seal his fate entirely. It began, as so many tragedies do, with love. Her name has been lost to time, swallowed by the years and the machinery of the courts. But to Tyler, she was everything. A girl from his neighborhood, someone who understood him in ways his family never could. They were young, reckless, and utterly convinced that what they felt was real and true and worth any risk. But her mother did not approve. She saw in Tyler something that worried her, some quality she could not name but recognized instinctively. She forbade her daughter from seeing him. She drew a line in the sand and dared them to cross it. They crossed it. The plan was simple in the way that only young love can make a plan seem simple. They would run away together. They would leave California behind and drive all the way to Texas, where they would marry and start a new life, far from disapproving parents and the suffocating rules of a world that refused to understand them. To make the journey, they needed a car. And so, with the certainty of youth and the desperation of hearts that believed themselves trapped, they stole one. They drove through the night, racing across highways that stretched endlessly beneath a sky full of stars. They sang along to the radio and made promises to each other that they believed with their whole souls. When exhaustion finally overtook them, they pulled the car into a quiet spot and fell asleep in each other's arms in the back seat, tangled together like two children who had wandered too far into the forest and could not find their way home. When they woke, the world had found them. A sheriff's deputy stood outside the car, knocking on the window with the calm, patient authority of a man who had seen this story play out 100 times before. Tyler and the girl tried to explain. They claimed they were local, just sleeping overnight, nothing to worry about. But the deputy was not convinced. He ran the plates, and within minutes, the truth unraveled like thread pulled from a fraying sweater. The car was stolen, reported missing from California, and the boy behind the wheel was already known to law enforcement. Tyler Davis Bingham was taken into custody. The girl was returned to her mother, and the dream of Texas, of marriage, of a life built on love and hope, dissolved like morning mist beneath the sun. But this time, the consequences were not minor. This time, Tyler would not simply go home with a warning and a slap on the wrist. At 14 years old, he was sentenced to the California Youth Authority, a state-level detention facility designed to house juveniles who had crossed the line from troubled to dangerous. The California Youth Authority, known simply as the CYA, was the largest youth prison system in the country. At its peak, it held 10,000 wards, not inmates' wards, because they were children still under the care of the court. The facilities were scattered across the state, each one a fortress of concrete and razor wire, each one a place where childhood went to pass away. Some believed the CYA could rehabilitate, that it could take a troubled child and set them on the right path through discipline, education, and structure. That belief, however noble, was rarely borne out by reality. For Tyler Davis Bingham, the California Youth Authority was not a place of healing. It was a crucible, a forge, where whatever softness remained in him would be burned away, leaving only the hard, unyielding core of a survivor. He entered the system at 14, still young enough to remember what it felt like to be loved, still close enough to childhood to recall the sweetness of a stolen kiss in the back seat of a car. But those memories would fade quickly in the darkness of the CYA, replaced by lessons far harsher and far more enduring. What Tyler learned there was not mathematics or history or the skills that might help him build a better future. What he learned was that the world was divided into predators and prey, that violence was not a choice, but a necessity, that mercy was weakness, and that survival demanded a willingness to fight, to strike first, to show no hesitation and no fear. The California Youth Authority would hold him for years, and when he finally emerged, he would no longer be the boy who had stolen a car for love. He would be something else entirely, something harder, something colder, something the world would come to know by another name, the Hulk. But that transformation had not yet occurred. For now, Tyler Davis Bingham was simply a 14-year-old boy standing at the threshold of a system that would consume him. A boy who had made a choice born of desperation and romance, a choice that seemed, in the moment, like the only option available. He could not have known what awaited him inside those walls. He could not have foreseen the long road of ending and stone that stretched before him, winding through decades of violence and loss, leading inevitably toward a destiny written not in the stars, but in the cold logic of incarceration and survival. And so he walked through the gates of the California Youth Authority, and behind him, those gates closed with a sound like thunder. The boy who entered would never truly leave, not in body and not in soul. For the system, once it claims you, it does not let go. It shapes you, it remakes you. And when it is finished, what emerges is no longer entirely human, but something both more and less than what you were. Tyler Davis Bingham had crossed a line from which there was no return, and the world, unknowing, turned its back and went about its business, unaware that it had just planted the seeds of something terrible and enduring. The California Youth Authority was not a school. It was not a sanctuary. It was a crucible where children were melted down and recast into something harder, sharper, and far more dangerous. To understand what Tyler Davis Bingham became, one must first understand the place that shaped him. The California Youth Authority existed in theory as a correctional facility for minors, a place where troubled youth could be rehabilitated and set upon a better path. But theory and reality, as they so often do, diverge dramatically within those walls. The facilities themselves were scattered across California, each one a compound of concrete blocks and chain link fences topped with coils of razor wire. They were built to contain, not to heal, to punish, not to teach. And within them, thousands of children learned lessons that would mark them for life. The conditions inside the California Youth Authority were nothing short of horrifying. Reports that emerged over the years painted a picture of systematic abuse, neglect, and violence that would shock even those familiar with the brutality of adult prisons. This was not simply a punitive environment. It was, in the words of those who studied it, a prison hellhole designed for children. Imagine, if you can, a place where darkness is used as punishment, where young boys and girls are locked in cells with no windows, where lights are turned out for hours or days at a time, leaving them alone with nothing but their fear and the sound of their own breathing, where isolation becomes a weapon wielded by those in authority, and where the psychological scars left by such treatment run deeper than any physical wound. The cells themselves were small and filthy. Urine and feces often went uncleaned for days. The air hung thick with the smell of decay and desperation. In some facilities, guards would throw gas canisters into cells as a form of punishment, then simply walk away, leaving children to choke and weep in the toxic fumes with no escape and no relief. Chronic understaffing meant that supervision was nearly non-existent. A single guard might be responsible for 60 or 70 children, an impossible ratio that guaranteed chaos. Without adequate oversight, the wards ran wild. They formed alliances and rivalries. They learned to fight not for sport, but for survival. And in the absence of adult protection, they turned on one another with a savagery that belied their ages. Perforations were common. Assaults were daily occurrences. The strong preyed upon the weak, and those who could not defend themselves quickly learned to align with someone who could. It was a microcosm of the worst aspects of human nature, concentrated and amplified within walls that were meant to correct but only corrupted. For a child entering the California Youth Authority, the experience was transformative in the most tragic sense. Juveniles who enter correctional facilities at a very young age are already placed at risk. But the question that haunted psychologists and social workers who studied the system was this: was the risk present before they were arrested? Or did the juvenile correctional facility itself become the risk factor? Or was it both, each feeding the other in a cycle that could not be broken? If a juvenile facility is equipped to handle youth properly, to rehabilitate them and put them on the right track, it can be a turning point towards something better. But the California Youth Authority was not such a place. It was the opposite, a training ground for criminals, a breeding ground for the state prison system, a place where children were systematically hardened into something unrecognizable. The other critical factor was group influence. When a juvenile enters a correctional facility and is surrounded by other juveniles who engage in lying, cheating, stealing, and violence, the effect is profound. The desire to fit in, to impress associates, to prove oneself worthy of respect, these are powerful forces in any young person's life. In a place like the California Youth Authority, where violence was the primary currency and fear the primary motivator, those forces became overwhelming. A child who might have made better choices in a different environment found himself instead trying to up the ante, to prove he was tougher, more dangerous, more willing to cross lines than anyone else. The associative group became everything, and the values of that group, shaped by incarceration and survival, became the values the child internalized. What you learn in a place like the California Youth Authority is simple and brutal. You learn that you must fight. You learn that violence is not optional but necessary. You learn that showing weakness invites attack, and that mercy is a luxury no one can afford. You learn that the world is divided into those who dominate and those who submit, and that the only question worth asking is which side you will be on. For Tyler Davis Bingham, these lessons sank deep. He was young, but he was also observant. He watched the older boys, the ones who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He studied how they carried themselves, how they spoke, how they moved through the world with a kind of coiled readiness that marked them as predators rather than prey. And he learned. He learned to fight with his fists and with whatever makeshift tools could be fashioned from the meager materials available. He learned to read situations quickly, to sense when violence was coming, and to strike first, rather than wait to be struck. He learned that reputation mattered more than almost anything else, that being known as someone willing and able to inflict harm was a kind of shield that offered protection where the authorities would not. The psychological impact of spending formative years in such an environment cannot be overstated. For many, the experience normalized incarceration. It became not an aberration, but an expected part of life, a rite of passage on the path to adulthood. When a juvenile begins to view entering correctional facilities as something normal, the battle is already lost. Incarceration becomes completely normalized in the brain. Going back to prison, reoffending, cycling in and out of the system, these things stop being failures and start being simply the way life works. The California Youth Authority turned troubled kids into full-fledged criminals. It took children who had made mistakes, who had acted out of desperation or confusion or youthful recklessness, and it transformed them into individuals who viewed violence as their primary tool, who saw the world through the lens of power and submission, who carried within them a coldness that would never fully thaw. It was, in essence, an Alcatraz system for kids, a place from which few emerged better and many emerged broken. Some became so hardened by the experience that they could no longer function in the outside world. Others, like Tyler Bingham, learned to thrive in environments where normal rules did not apply, where strength and ruthlessness were the only virtues that mattered. Tyler was released from the California Youth Authority at around the age of 19. He had entered as a boy of 14, guilty of little more than stealing a car in a misguided romantic gesture. He emerged 5 years later as something else entirely. The softness of youth had been beaten out of him. The capacity for trust, for vulnerability, for the simple pleasures of ordinary life, these had been replaced by instincts honed for survival in the most brutal conditions imaginable. The system had done its work, not the work it claimed to do, not the work of rehabilitation and redemption, but the work it actually accomplished, the creation of a career criminal, a man for whom violence was not a last resort, but a first language, a man who would spend the rest of his life moving through the machinery of incarceration, as if it were the only world that made sense. When Tyler walked out of the California Youth Authority, he carried with him no diploma, no job skills, no meaningful education. What he carried instead was a set of lessons learned in darkness and loss. He carried the knowledge that the world was a hostile place, that authority could not be trusted, that survival depended on strength and cunning and a willingness to do what others would not. He carried, too, a sense that his path was already set, that the choice had been made not by him but for him years ago when he was sent to that first facility at 14. The system had claimed him, and it would not let him go. He would be in and out of prison for the rest of his life, cycling through institutions with a grim predictability, each stint reinforcing what the last had taught. The California Youth Authority had transformed Tyler Davis Bingham from a boy who stole a car for love into a young man who understood only power, and that transformation was irreversible. The boy was gone. What remained was the foundation upon which a monster would be built. But even now, freshly released at 19, the worst was still to come. The darkness Tyler had known in the California Youth Authority was only a shadow of what awaited him in the adult prison system. The lessons he had learned were only the beginning, and the name he would one day carry, the Hulk, was still years away from being spoken in fear. For now, he was simply a young man stepping back into a world that had moved on without him. A young man who no longer fits anywhere except behind bars. When Tyler Davis Bingham walked free from the California Youth Authority, he carried with him something invisible but unshakable. The belief that violence was not a choice but a language, and he had become fluent. Freedom, for those who have known only incarceration during their formative years, is a strange and disorienting thing. The world outside moves at a different pace, follows different rules, expects a kind of compliance and normalcy that feels foreign to those who have learned to survive in cages. Tyler emerged into the California sunlight at 19 years old, technically an adult, but in many ways still frozen in the moment of his arrest at 14. The years that followed his release were marked by instability and a growing pattern of recidivism. He drifted through jobs and relationships, never quite settling, never quite finding a place where he belonged. The civilian world, with its mundane concerns and unspoken social contracts, felt suffocating to someone who had spent his adolescence in an environment where only strength mattered. There were multiple attempts to flee the pull of the system, brief periods of employment, moments when it seemed Tyler might find a different path. But each time, something pulled him back. Perhaps it was the boredom of ordinary life, or the difficulty of navigating a world that seemed designed for people who had not been broken in the ways he had been broken. Perhaps it was simply that prison had become the only place that made sense to him. The flight attempts during this period were more symbolic than practical, trying to run from probation officers, from court dates, from the weight of a criminal record that followed him like a shadow. Each attempt ended in recapture. Each recapture added new charges, new complications, new reasons for the system to keep its grip on him. And then, in his early 20s, Tyler Davis Bingham made a choice that would seal his fate entirely and send him into the adult prison system for what would become the rest of his life. He walked into a liquor store with a piece in his hand. The details of that day are stark in their simplicity. It was not a sophisticated crime, not the work of a master criminal or a carefully planned heist. It was desperate and direct, the act of a man who saw something he wanted and took it because that was what he had learned to do. He entered the store in daylight. The clerk behind the counter looked up, perhaps expecting a routine customer, someone buying cigarettes or beverages. Instead, he found himself staring at the barrel of a device. Tyler demanded money. His voice was calm, controlled. The voice of someone who had learned not to show fear, even when committing an act that could end his freedom forever. The clerk, terrified, complied. He opened the register, hands shaking, and began pulling out bills. But Tyler did not simply take the money and leave. What happened next revealed something darker, something that spoke to the lessons learned in the California Youth Authority, where violence was not just accepted, but expected, where showing dominance meant taking things further than necessary. He ordered the clerk into the bathroom, the small, windowless space at the back of the store. The clerk went, knowing that resistance might mean the end. And there, in that confined space, Tyler raised the device and brought it down hard against the clerk's skull. The blow was brutal and deliberate, not enough to conclude a life, but enough to incapacitate, to ensure the clerk would not immediately call the police, to send a message that Tyler Davis Bingham was not someone to be trifled with. The clerk collapsed, blood running from the wound, consciousness fading as Tyler pocketed the cash and walked calmly out of the store. When he was arrested shortly afterward, His explanation was delivered with a chilling matter-of-factness. He needed money, so he took it. There was no remorse in his voice, no recognition that what he had done was anything other than a practical solution to a practical problem. In his mind, shaped by years of deprivation and violence, the logic was simple and unassailable. Tyler Davis Bingham pleaded guilty to robbery in the first degree and assault with a deadly instrument. The charges were serious, the kind that carried significant prison time even for a first-time adult offender. But Tyler was not a first-time offender. He had a juvenile record that spoke to years of criminal behavior, and the courts took notice. He was sentenced to prison, real prison, not the youth facilities where he had spent his teenage years, but the adult correctional system that housed California's most dangerous and violent offenders. His first stop was San Quentin State Prison. San Quentin sits on the edge of the San Francisco Bay, a sprawling fortress of concrete and steel that has housed California's condemned and incarcerated since 1852. It is the oldest prison in California, a place whose very name carries weight and history, a place where legends are born and lives are ended with grim regularity. But Tyler's time at San Quentin was brief. In 1973, he was transferred to another facility, one that would become far more significant in his story. He was sent to Old Folsom State Prison. Old Folsom is instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with California's correctional system. It has an iconic guard tower that rises above the prison yard, a stone sentinel watching over the movements of the men below. The facility itself was built in the 1850s, constructed of granite blocks quarried by the very prisoners it was designed to hold. It looks, even today, like something out of another era, a monument to a harsher time when punishment was openly brutal and rehabilitation was barely considered. The prison has 5 tiers in each cell block. Enforcers walk the rails with long-reach devices at the ready, their presence a constant reminder that violence can be met with final force. Additional enforcers stand in towers positioned around the yard, their fields of fire overlapping to ensure that no corner of the facility is beyond their reach. For decades, Old Folsom housed the worst of the worst. The men sent there were not petty criminals or first-time offenders. They were violent, dangerous, often beyond the reach of conventional rehabilitation. The prison's reputation was built on losses and terror, on riots and takings, on a culture of violence that permeated every aspect of daily life. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, and even into the 90s, Old Folsom was a war zone. Perforations were a constant occurrence, happening with such regularity that they became almost routine. Guards grew numb to the violence. Inmates grew accustomed to the sight of blood on concrete, and the prison operated under an uneasy acceptance that the end was simply part of the landscape. Infamous inmates passed through Old Folsom's gates over the years. Sonny Barger, a founding member of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang, served time there, his presence lending an air of outlaw mystique to an already notorious institution. Charles Jackson, known as the East Bay Slayer, was housed there after being convicted of killing at least 7 women and 1 man. His crimes so brutal that even hardened criminals kept their distance. Into this environment came Tyler Davis Bingham, still in his 20s, still learning the full extent of what it meant to survive in a world governed entirely by violence and hierarchy and the raw exercise of power. It was here, in the stone corridors and blood-stained yards of Old Folsom, that Tyler had his first real contact with prison gangs. Prison gangs are as old as prisons themselves. They form initially out of necessity. Men thrown together in confined spaces, facing threats from all sides, naturally band together with those who share some common identity or interest. In California's prisons, that common identity was most often heritage. There were Mexican gangs, powerful and well organized, with roots that stretch back decades and connections to criminal enterprises on the outside. There were black gangs, formed partly in response to systemic biases within the prison system itself, and partly as a means of self-protection in an environment where showing weakness could be final. And there were white groupings, groups that drew on prejudicial ideology, but functioned primarily as vehicles for survival and profit. For a white inmate entering a place like Old Folsom, the choice of which gang to align with was not really a choice at all. Neutrality was not an option. When violence erupted, as it inevitably did, every man had to pick a side. To refuse was to mark oneself as weak, as unreliable, as someone who could not be trusted. And in prison, where trust and reputation are the only currencies that matter, such a mark could be a conclusion. Tyler Davis Bingham looked around Old Folsom and saw the landscape clearly. He understood, perhaps better than most, that survival here required more than just physical strength. It required belonging to something larger, something that could offer protection and purpose in equal measure. And so he made his choice. Or perhaps the choice had already been made for him, written into the trajectory of his life the moment he stepped through the gates of the California Youth Authority years before. He joined the Aryan Brotherhood, and in doing so, he set in motion events that would define not only his own life, but the lives of countless others. His transformation was nearly complete. The boy who had stolen a car for love was gone. What remained was a man shaped by violence, hardened by incarceration, ready to claim his place in a world where mercy was myth and power was all. To look upon Old Folsom State Prison is to look upon a fortress of the mid-19th century, where 5 tiers of cells rise like the ribs of an ancient sleeping beast, carved directly into the unforgiving granite of the California earth. It is a place where the architecture itself seems to whisper of the passage of decades, a Gothic cathedral of iron and stone that has stood as a silent witness to the long, slow march of those the world has chosen to forget. When Tyler Davis Bingham arrived at these gates in 1973, he was not merely entering a building. He was entering a legend, a place where the sun sets behind an iconic guard tower that looms over the landscape like a sentinel from a darker age. Here, time does not move in minutes or hours, but in the steady, rhythmic clanging of heavy gates and the low, constant hum of 1,000 souls confined within a labyrinth of grey. The prison, built in the 1880s, remains one of the oldest in the American West, and its physical presence carries a weight that is almost tangible. To walk its corridors is to feel the coldness of the stone seep into one's bones, a reminder of the thousands who have paced these same narrow floors before. The cell blocks are cavernous, designed with a verticality that feels both grand and suffocating, where the air is thick with the scent of old dust and the lingering echoes of a century of sighs. For a man like Tyler, who had already been seasoned by the harsh realities of the youth authority and the crowded halls of San Quentin, Folsom represented a finality. It was the destination for the worst of the worst, a destination where the state concentrated its most volatile energies, hoping that the thick granite walls would be enough to contain the fires burning within. In the early 1970s, Folsom was a place of constant, low-frequency tension, a war zone where the lines of combat were drawn not in the dirt, but in the hearts of the men who walked the yard. There were enforcers on the rails and enforcers in the high towers, their silhouettes sharp against the blue California sky, holding the power of life and the final breath in a single, measured movement of the finger. The atmosphere was one of perpetual vigilance, a world where every glance had a meaning and every silence was a calculation. It was within this environment that the concept of the prison gang began to evolve from a loose collection of protective circles into something far more organized, more disciplined, and more lethal. The stone walls did not just keep men in, they forced them together, creating a pressure cooker of tribalism where survival depended entirely on the strength of one's brotherhood. Tyler, now known among the inmates as the Hulk, moved through this landscape with a quiet, terrifying grace. His physical mass, cultivated through thousands of hours of rhythmic labor in the weight pile, made him an imposing figure, a man who seemed constructed of the same unyielding material as the prison itself. He was in his early 20s, yet he carried the gravitas of a veteran, his eyes having already seen the full spectrum of institutional cruelty. In Folsom, he found himself surrounded by the Grey Lords, the veteran convicts who had spent 20, 30, or 40 years within the system. These were men whose hair had turned the color of the granite walls, men who knew the secret rhythms of the prison and who watched the arrival of the young, burly stranger with a mix of curiosity and respect. They saw in Tyler a reflection of the old ways, a man who understood that in the absence of law, there is only strength and the word of one's kin. The gangs of Folsom were organized along the primal lines of lineage, a mirror of the world outside, but stripped of all its polite pretenses. There were the Mexican gangs, the Black Guerrilla family, and the burgeoning white-biased groups, each occupying their own territory on the yard like sovereign nations. For many who entered Folsom, joining a gang was a matter of simple arithmetic. To stand alone was to be a target, a lone leaf in a storm of steel. But for Tyler, joining the Aryan Brotherhood was more than a search for protection. It was a recognition of identity, a way to channel the elemental force within him into a structure that rewarded the very traits the state sought to punish. The Brotherhood was still young in those years. A group born in the 1960s as a defensive shield for white inmates who felt the shifting tides of prison demographics. It was a brotherhood of the marginalized, a collection of men who had decided that if they were to be outcasts, they would be the most feared outcasts in the history of the system. Within the 5 tiers of Folsom, the Aryan Brotherhood was beginning to dream of something larger than mere survival. They were moving away from the simple, reactive violence of the past and toward a more sophisticated understanding of power. They realized that the prison was not just a cage, but a marketplace, a place where substances, cigarettes, and influence were the true currencies of the realm. Tyler fitted into this evolving machine like a master gear. He was a man who led not through grand oratory, but through the undeniable reality of his presence. When he walked across the yard, the conversations of others would often falter, a rhythmic dip in the ambient noise of the prison. He was becoming a hero within the gang, a figure whose prowess in combat was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones during the long lockups of the night. It was said that Tyler did not just fight. He dismantled his opposition with a clinical, heavy-handed efficiency that left no room for doubt. The life of a prisoner in Folsom during this era was defined by a series of repetitive, soul-crushing rituals. The morning whistle, the counting of heads, the slow movement to the mess hall, and the hours spent in the yard where the sun beat down on the granite, reflecting a heat that felt as old as the earth itself. But beneath this surface of monotony, a secret history was being written. In the shadowed corners of the tiers and the blind spots of the towers, the leaders of the Brotherhood were meeting, weaving a web of influence that would soon stretch beyond the walls of Folsom to every corner of the California penal system. Tyler was at the center of these quiet councils, his voice measured and calm, his mind always looking towards the next move on the board. He understood that the prison was a living organism, and like any organism, it could be controlled if one knew where to apply the pressure. As the years passed, Tyler's reputation as a man of iron and shadow continued to grow. He was the youngest of the big boys, a man who had earned his seat at the table through a series of engagements that were spoken of as mythic battles. He was the embodiment of the Brotherhood's blood in, blood out philosophy, a code that demanded the ultimate sacrifice for entry and promised the ultimate penalty for departure. This was a world where a man's life was worth only as much as the steel he carried and the brothers who stood at his back. Tyler ensured that his brothers were always ready, his own discipline serving as a silent template for the rest of the gang. He was a product of the system, a man who had been raised by the state in the dark cells of the youth, authority. And now he was using the lessons the state had taught him to build an empire within the state's own walls. The iconic guard tower of Folsom, with its stone base and narrow windows, remains the most enduring symbol of this era. It represents the unblinking eye of authority, the constant reminder that even in a world of gangs and shadow kings, the state still holds the final word. But Tyler and the Brotherhood learned to live within the gaps of that authority, to find the moments when the eye blinked or the tower was distracted by the mundane tasks of administration. They built a society within a society, a kingdom of the damned, where the laws were written in blood, and the only justice was that which a man could take for himself. Tyler Davis Bingham, the boy from Sacramento who had once dreamt of a simple life in Texas, was now the architect of a dark destiny, his name becoming synonymous with the very granite that held him. To understand Folsom in the 1970s is to understand the soul of the American prison system at its most raw and unyielding. It was a place where the air was heavy with the scent of old iron and the rhythmic sound of heavy boots on stone. It was a place where a man like Tyler could rise to become a god of the yard, his strength and his silence becoming the foundation upon which an entire empire was built. He was the Hulk, a man whose muscles were a shield and whose word was a decree. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the 5 tiers, the prison felt less like a place of punishment and more like a fortress of the old world, a place where the grey lords and the young warriors waited for the next turn of the wheel. But while Tyler ruled the yard with a measured, deliberate hand, the world beyond the walls was beginning to shift. New laws were being drafted, new prisons were being planned, and a new generation of inmates was preparing to enter the gates of Folsom. The peace of the yard was always a fragile thing, a temporary lull in a storm that had been brewing for over 100 years. For now, the Brotherhood held the keys to the kingdom, and Tyler stood at the summit of his power, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon he would never truly reach. As this chapter of the Iron Shadow closes, the silence of the Folsom night is broken only by the distant, rhythmic footsteps of a lone guard on the rail. Tyler Davis Bingham sleeps in his narrow cell, the granite walls holding his dreams as tightly as they hold his body, while in the shadows of the next tier, a new arrival prepares to challenge the order of the yard. The saga of the Brotherhood is only beginning, and the blood that has been spilled is merely the first drop in a river that will soon overflow its banks. The California Youth Authority was not a school. It was not a sanctuary. It was a crucible where children were melted down and recast into something harder, sharper, and far more dangerous. To understand what Tyler Davis Bingham became, one must first understand the place that shaped him. The California Youth Authority existed in theory as a correctional facility for minors, a place where troubled youth could be rehabilitated and set upon a better path. But theory and reality, as they so often do, diverged dramatically within those walls. The facilities themselves were scattered across California, each one a compound of concrete blocks and chain-link fences topped with coils of razor wire. They were built to contain, not to heal, to punish, not to teach, and within them, thousands of children learned lessons that would mark them for life. The conditions inside the California Youth Authority were nothing short of horrifying. Reports that emerged over the years painted a picture of systematic abuse, neglect, and violence that would shock even those familiar with the brutality of adult prisons. This was not simply a punitive environment. It was, in the words of those who studied it, a prison hellhole designed for children. Imagine, if you can, a place where darkness is used as punishment, where young boys and girls are locked in cells with no windows, where lights are turned out for hours or days at a time, leaving them alone with nothing but their fear and the sound of their own breathing, where isolation becomes a weapon wielded by those in authority, and where the psychological scars left by such treatment run deeper than any physical wound. The cells themselves were small and filthy. Urine and feces often went uncleaned for days. The air hung thick with the smell of decay and desperation. In some facilities, guards would throw gas canisters into cells as a form of punishment, then simply walk away, leaving children to choke and weep in the toxic fumes with no escape and no relief. Chronic understaffing meant that supervision was nearly non-existent. A single guard be responsible for 60 or 70 children, an impossible ratio that guaranteed chaos. Without adequate oversight, the wards ran wild. They formed alliances and rivalries. They learned to fight not for sport, but for survival. And in the absence of adult protection, they turned on one another with a savagery that belied their ages. Perforations were common. Assaults were daily occurrences. The strong preyed upon the weak, and those who could not defend themselves quickly learned to align with someone who could. It was a microcosm of the worst aspects of human nature, concentrated and amplified within walls that were meant to correct, but only corrupted. For a child entering the California Youth Authority, the experience was transformative in the most tragic sense. Juveniles who enter correctional facilities at a very young age are already placed at risk. But the question that haunted psychologists and social workers who studied the system was this: was the risk present before they were arrested? Or did the juvenile correctional facility itself become the risk factor? Or was it both, each feeding the other in a cycle that could not be broken? If a juvenile facility is equipped to handle youth properly, to rehabilitate them and put them on the right track, it can be a turning point towards something better. But the California Youth Authority was not such a place. It was the opposite: a training ground for criminals, a breeding ground for the state prison system, a place where children were systematically hardened into something unrecognizable. The other critical factor was group influence. When a juvenile enters a correctional facility and is surrounded by other juveniles who engage in lying, cheating, stealing, and violence, the effect is profound. The desire to fit in, to impress associates, to prove oneself worthy of respect, these are powerful forces in any young person's life. In a place like the California Youth Authority, where violence was the primary currency and fear the primary motivator, those forces became overwhelming. A child who might have made better choices in a different environment found himself instead trying to up the ante to prove he was tougher, more dangerous, more willing to cross lines than anyone else. The associative group became everything, and the values of that group, shaped by incarceration and survival, became the values the child internalized. What you learn in a place like the California Youth Authority is simple and brutal. You learn that you must fight. You learn that violence is not optional but necessary. You learn that showing weakness invites attack, and that mercy is a luxury no one can afford. You learn that the world is divided into those who dominate and those who submit, and that the only question worth asking is which side you will be on. For Tyler Davis Bingham, these lessons sank deep. He was young, but he was also observant. He watched the older boys, the ones who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He studied how they carried themselves, how they spoke, how they moved through the world with a kind of coiled readiness that marked them as predators rather than prey. And he learned. He learned to fight with his fists and with whatever makeshift tools could be fashioned from the meager materials available. He learned to read situations quickly, to sense when violence was coming, and to strike first rather than wait to be struck. He learned that reputation mattered more than almost anything else, that being known as someone willing and able to inflict harm was a kind of shield that offered protection where the authorities would not. The psychological impact of spending formative years in such an environment cannot be overstated. For many, the experience normalized incarceration. It became not an aberration, but an expected part of life, a rite of passage on the path to adulthood. When a juvenile begins to view entering correctional facilities as something normal, the battle is already lost. Incarceration becomes completely normalized in the brain. Going back to prison, reoffending, cycling in and out of the system, these things stop being failures and start being simply the way life works. The California Youth Authority turned troubled kids into full-fledged criminals. It took children who had made mistakes, who had acted out of desperation or confusion or youthful recklessness, and it transformed them into individuals who viewed violence as their primary tool, who saw the world through the lens of power and submission, who carried within them a coldness that would never fully thaw. It was, in essence, an Alcatraz system for kids, a place from which few emerged better and many emerged broken. Some became so hardened by the experience that they could no longer function in the outside world. Others, like Tyler Bingham, learned to thrive in environments where normal rules did not apply, where strength and ruthlessness were the only virtues that mattered. Tyler was released from the California Youth Authority at around the age of 19. He had entered as a boy of 14, guilty of little more than stealing a car in a misguided romantic gesture. He emerged 5 years later as something else entirely. The softness of youth had been beaten out of him. The capacity for trust, for vulnerability, for the simple pleasures of ordinary life, these had been replaced by instincts honed for survival in the most brutal conditions imaginable. The system had done its work, not the work it claimed to do, not the work of rehabilitation and redemption, but the work it actually accomplished. The creation of a career criminal, a man for whom violence was not a last resort, but a first language, a man who would spend the rest of his life moving through the machinery of incarceration as if it were the only world that made sense. When Tyler walked out of the California Youth Authority, he carried with him no diploma, no job skills, no meaningful education. What he carried instead was a set of lessons learned in darkness and loss. He carried the knowledge that the world was a hostile place, that authority could not be trusted, that survival depended on strength and cunning and a willingness to do what others would not. He carried, too, a sense that his path was already set, that the choice had been made, not by him, but for him, years ago when he was sent to that first facility at 14. The system had claimed him, and it would not let go. He would be in and out of prison for the rest of his life, cycling through institutions with a grim predictability, each stint reinforcing what the last had taught. The California Youth Authority had transformed Tyler Davis Bingham from a boy who stole a car for love into a young man who understood only power. And that transformation was irreversible. The boy was gone. What remained was the foundation upon which a monster would be built. But even now, freshly released at 19, the worst was still to come. The darkness Tyler had known in the California Youth Authority was only a shadow of what awaited him in the adult prison system. The lessons he had learned were only the beginning, and the name he would one day carry, the Hulk, was still years away from being spoken in fear. For now, he was simply a young man stepping back into a world that had moved on without him. A young man who no longer fits anywhere except behind bars. In the year 1977, the atmosphere inside Old Folsom was that of a slow-motion war zone. Perforations were constant, rhythmic events that punctuated the long silences of the afternoon. It was a world of high stakes and narrow margins, where a man's survival depended entirely on the strength of his body and the clarity of his alliances. Tyler, who had spent his childhood learning to fight for his life, found that his physical prowess made him a natural center of gravity. He took his weightlifting seriously, spending hours in the yard under the hot California sun, his muscles expanding until he became an imposing, burly figure. The other inmates began to call him the Hulk, a name that carried with it a sense of elemental force. He was no longer just a troubled kid from Sacramento. He was the prototypical image of a man who had mastered the environment of the cage. Within the walls of Folsom, Tyler had his first meaningful contact with the prison gangs, those loosely formed tribes of men who banded together for protection and survival. In a place where ancestral riots were a constant threat, and the guards often let the violence happen as a form of social control, joining a gang was not a choice, it was a necessity. You had the Mexican gangs, the black gangs, and the white-biased groups, each occupying their own corner of the yard, their eyes always moving, always measuring the distance between themselves and their rivals. For a man like Tyler, there was only one path. He found the Aryan Brotherhood, a group that had originated in the 1960s as a defensive shield for white inmates who found themselves outnumbered. The Aryan Brotherhood was already well established by the time Tyler arrived, but it was in a state of evolution. It was moving away from a purely ideological stance and toward a more sophisticated structure of business and control. They were getting into substance dealing, loan sharking, and the trade of commodities that made prison life bearable. They were a gang that valued two things above all else: loyalty and the capacity for extreme violence. Tyler fitted into this structure with a frightening precision. He did not just join the Brotherhood, he became its hero. His reputation was that of a man with the strength of 4 or 5 others, a warrior who could stand at your side in a yard fight and ensure that you would not lose. He was a man's man in a world that had stripped away everything but the rawest essentials of masculinity. Within just a few short years, Tyler Davis Bingham began to excel in the rigid, hyper-masculine hierarchy of the gang. He moved through the ranks with the same steady, deliberate pace that he moved across the yard. He was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, the stone walls seemed to listen. He became a leader, one of the few who held the keys to the Brotherhood's future. He was a product of the system in the most complete sense, a man whose entire moral and social landscape had been defined by the state's efforts to contain him. The boy who had stolen a car to run away with his love was now a powerful gangster, a commissioner of a shadow empire that was beginning to spread its wings across the entire California prison system. As we watch Tyler stand in the shadow of the Folsom guard tower, his burly frame cast in sharp relief against the ancient granite, we see the culmination of a decade of institutional alchemy. The state had attempted to bend him, to break him, and to reform him. But instead, it had created something far more resilient and dangerous. He was a man who had made peace with the iron and the stone. He had found a home in the one place the rest of the world feared most, and he was preparing to lead his brotherhood into a new era of darkness and profit. The alchemy was complete. The boy was concluded, and the Hulk had taken his throne. But as Tyler solidified his power within the 5 tiers of Old Folsom, a new figure was approaching the gates, a younger man who would soon become his right hand and a witness to the losses that were to come. For while Tyler had mastered the stone, he had yet to meet the man who would help him turn the yard into a river of crimson foam. For now, the sun set slowly over the iconic tower, casting long, rhythmic shadows across the yard, where the next storm is already beginning to gather in the silence of the afternoon. In the 60-year history of the high-walled world, a new order began to stir within the shifting shadows of the yard. A brotherhood born not of a single choice, but of a deep tribal necessity that whispered through the iron bars long before it was ever written in blood. This was the dawn of a secret society, a union forged in the silence of the cells to act as a shield against the rising tides of an increasingly crowded and volatile system. When we look back at the 1960s, we see the beginning of a transformation where the solitary prisoner was replaced by the collective, and where Tyler Davis Bingham found the vehicle that would carry his influence far beyond the limits of his own physical strength. The Brotherhood was not just a gang. It was becoming a sovereign nation within the state, a brotherhood of the marginalized who sought to dictate the terms of their own survival. As the demographics of the California penal system began to shift in the mid-20th century, the atmosphere within places like San Quentin and Old Folsom grew heavy with a new kind of tension. Inmates who had once operated as individuals or small local cliques found themselves part of a much larger ancestral landscape. For the white inmates, who often felt the weight of being a fragmented minority within the yard, the need for a unified front became an undeniable truth. They looked to one another in the quiet hours of the afternoon, sharing the same fears and the same growing sense of isolation. From this shared breath, the Aryan Brotherhood was born, originally conceived as a defensive alliance, a circle of protection meant to ensure that no man stood alone when the sirens began to wail. In its earliest form, the Brotherhood was a loosely gathered group, but it possessed a core philosophy that was as rigid as the granite of Folsom. It was built upon a foundation of one man, one vote, a democratic shadow that stood in stark contrast to the absolute authority of the prison guards. Within this structure, every member was considered a peer, a brother bound by a sacred oath to defend the collective interest above all else. They adopted a philosophy that later poets of the yard would call blood in, blood out, a rhythmic and final decree which meant that the only way to earn a place in the circle was through a significant act of sacrifice, and the only way to leave was through the finality of the end. This was a world where loyalty was not a suggestion, but a requirement for existence. Tyler Davis Bingham arrived as this organization was reaching its maturity, moving from a reactive group of fighters to a sophisticated hierarchy of control. Because of his background in youth authority and his natural imposing mass, Tyler did not have to seek out leadership. It seemed to gravitate toward him like iron filings to a magnet. He was the prototypical member, burly, disciplined, and possessing a stillness that unsettled those who did not know him. He understood the one man, one vote system, but he also understood that in a democracy of warriors, the man who is most willing to act often carries the most silent votes. He moved through the ranks not with loud boasts, but with a steady, deliberate competence that made his rise seem like a natural law of the prison environment. Under the influence of leaders like Tyler, the Brotherhood began to refine its purpose. They realized that while protection was the origin, power was the destination. The gang began to move away from a purely ideological or defensive stance and leaned into the mechanics of business. The prison yard was a closed ecosystem, and like any ecosystem, it required resources: tobacco, coffee, substances, and information. The Brotherhood sought to become the primary keepers of these resources. They organized their ranks with a precision that mirrored the military, establishing clear roles and responsibilities that allowed them to operate even when their leaders were locked in solitary confinement. Tyler was an architect of this transition, helping to turn a collection of brawlers into a disciplined organization that could exert pressure on the administration and rival groups alike. The strength of the Brotherhood lay in its ability to produce fear, and fear was a currency that Tyler managed with a calm, measured hand. He was a man's man in a world that had stripped away the comforts of the outside, and his reputation as a fearless fighter made him a hero to the younger initiates. When a new inmate entered Folsom, they would hear the name of the Hulk whispered in the shadows of the mess hall. They were told stories of his physical prowess, of how he could bench press 400 pounds in the midday heat and then walk into a yard fight with a clinical, heavy-hearted efficiency. To the young and the frightened, Tyler was a pillar of certainty in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. He offered them a place in the iron shadow, a sense of belonging that the state could never provide. As the 1970s progressed, the Brotherhood's influence began to spread like a slow-moving ink across the California prison map. When members were transferred from Folsom to San Quentin or to the newer facilities in the South, they took the Brotherhood with them. It was a viral expansion, one that the Department of Corrections struggled to contain. Tyler was often at the center of these movements, his presence acting as a stabilizing force wherever he landed. He was a commissioner of this shadow empire, a man who understood that the true power of the Brotherhood was not in the number of its members, but in the absolute quality of their commitment. To be AB was to be part of something eternal, a bond that transcended the temporary nature of a prison sentence. The structure of the gang was designed to survive the loss of any single individual. By emphasizing the collective over the self, the Brotherhood ensured that its business would continue regardless of who was in the hole or who was being paroled. Decisions of weight, who was to be hit, who was to be sponsored for membership, and which rivalries were to be pursued, were made through a measured process of consultation among the high-ranking members. Tyler was a master of this process. He possessed a long memory and a patient heart, qualities that are rare in a place where tempers are short and life is cheap. He looked at the prison system not as a series of disconnected buildings, but as a single, vast organism that could be mastered through discipline and the strategic application of violence. Inside the 5 tiers of Folsom, the Brotherhood created their own rituals and their own language. They used codes and kites, tiny, tightly folded notes, to communicate across the cell blocks, often slipping them through the gaps in the bars or handing them off during the rhythmic movement of the lines. They studied the habits of the guards, identifying the blind spots where the towers could not see, and used these spaces for their most important meetings. Tyler sat in these shadows, his burly frame barely moving as he listened to the reports of his captains. He was building a legacy that would outlast his own stay in Folsom, a legacy of iron and shadow that would eventually reach into the federal system and beyond. As the Brotherhood grew in power, it also grew in its capacity for legendary violence. This was not the chaotic lashing out of the desperate, but a targeted, administrative violence meant to maintain the order they had established. If a man owed a debt, he paid it. If a man broke his oath, he was erased. The blood in, blood out decree was the ultimate stabilizer of their society. It ensured that every member was fully invested in the survival of the group, for their lives literally depended on the man standing next to them. Tyler embodied this reality. He was a warrior who led from the front, but he was also a strategist who knew that a well-placed word could be as lethal as a sharpened shiv. The world of the 1960s and 70s was a time of great upheaval on the outside, with social movements and cultural shifts changing the face of the country. But inside the granite walls of Folsom, time felt stationary, a heavy and unchanging weight. The Brotherhood was a response to that weight. a way for men to carve out a sense of agency in a place designed to strip it away. Tyler Davis Bingham was the human face of that response, a man who had been raised by the state in the youth authority and who had returned to the state's most ancient fortress to build something the state could not control. He was the Hulk, the commissioner, the brother who never forgot a slight and never wavered in his duty to the Iron Shadow. As we conclude this chapter of the Brotherhood's rise, we see Tyler standing on the upper tiers of the Folsom cell block, looking down at the rhythmic movement of the inmates below. He is no longer just a prisoner. He is the leader of a growing empire, a man who has found a dark kind of peace within the stone. The foundation has been laid, the oaths have been sworn, and the business of the Brotherhood is about to expand into a bloodier and more profitable era. The shadow is lengthening, reaching out from the granite of Folsom to touch every corner of the yard, while in the distance, the next generation of warriors begins to gather their strength. But the true test of the Brotherhood's power is yet to come, for a new alliance is forming on the horizon, one that will bring Tyler into contact with a different kind of warrior. The yard is quiet for now, the air thick with the scent of old iron and anticipation, but the silence is merely the breath before the storm. Tyler waits in the gloom, his burly shoulders unmoving, while the clock in the iconic guard tower ticks away the final minutes of the old order. The river of blood is rising, and the Brotherhood is ready to navigate its currents, whatever the cost may be. It was in the year 1977 that two paths crossed in the shifting dust of the prison yard, a meeting that would bind two men in a partnership of iron and shadow for years to come. In the heavy, stationary air of Old Folsom, where the granite walls seem to absorb the heat and the history of every soul they contain, Tyler Davis Bingham encountered a young man whose arrival would mark a new chapter in the chronicle of the Brotherhood. This young man was Michael Thompson, and though he entered the gates as a stranger to the secret societies of the yard, he possessed a quiet, unyielding pride that the veteran convicts recognized as a rare and dangerous currency. Their meeting was not a collision of enemies, but a recognition of shared quality, a bridge built between two warriors who understood that in the high-walled world, character is revealed not in words, but in the measured cadence of one's actions. Michael Thompson arrived at Old Folsom as the youngest man in the facility, a place where nearly everyone else carried the gray hair and weathered skin of lifelong incarceration. He was immediately cast into the hole, that solitary darkness where time ceases to be a sequence and becomes a weight. When he finally emerged into the sunlight of the main yard, he was introduced to the big boys, the leaders of the major gangs who stood like statues at the edge of the dust, watching the new arrivals with the cold, assessing the eyes of kings. Among them were the Aryan Brotherhood, the Mexican Mafia, the Black Panthers, and the Black Guerrilla family. These were veteran convicts, men who had mastered the art of survival in a world where the price of a mistake was often paid in blood. The first test of Michael's spirit came not from his own kind, but from the Black Panthers. A leader known as Yogi approached him, offering a recruitment speech that wove together threads of the Communist Manifesto and a critique of what he called the establishment. Michael, who by his own admission could not yet read or write and had no intellectual grasp of global politics, listened with a calm, measured attention. But when the choice was presented to be with us or against us, Michael found his answer in a simple, elemental truth. He told the leader that he was an American, and if being an American meant he was against them, then so it would be. It was a rejection born of instinct, a refusal to compromise his identity for the sake of a false and easy protection. Declining an invitation in a place like Folsom is not merely a social slight. It is an invitation to combat. As Michael walked through the gate of the yard shortly after his refusal, 4 men rushed him with knives. The attack was swift and rhythmic, taking him to the ground in a flurry of movement. They perforated him repeatedly, the blades chinking against the dark asphalt beneath him. But they did not hit anything vital. Almost as quickly as they had begun, the attackers vanished as shots were fired from the enforcement towers. The guards raining lead and shrapnel down upon the yard to break the violence. Michael lay on the ground, his body punctured and bleeding. Yet as the guards approached with a gurney, he did a thing that would change his fate forever. He refused to lie down. With a slow, agonizing deliberation, Michael Thompson rose to his feet. He told the guards he would walk off the yard on his own power, and though it took him a minute to find his balance, he did exactly that. He shuffled toward the gates, the same way he had arrived, his pride serving as a brace against the pain of his wounds. This act of defiance had an enormous impact on the men who watched from the shadows. To fail to end a man is one thing, but to watch that man rise under his own steam and walk away is a message that echoes through the tears. It was this display of character, this absolute refusal to be broken, that caught the eye of Tyler Davis Bingham. Shortly after Michael's recovery, Tyler approached him in the yard. Tyler, the man they called the Hulk, extended a hand in a gesture of respect that was rare among the rival factions. He told Michael that he liked the way he had handled himself, the way he had stood his ground, and the way he had walked off the yard. Tyler offered him a place with the Aryan Brotherhood, but Michael, still clinging to his independence, declined, saying he would do his own thing for now. Tyler did not react with anger or the typical posturing of a gang boss. He simply spit on the dust, laughed, and told the young man, "We got your back." It was a moment of profound recognition. Tyler saw in Michael a warrior who did not need to be coerced, a man who understood the value of his own word. Tyler Davis Bingham was, in Michael's eyes, a man's man, perhaps the most violent individual he had ever encountered, yet possessed of a charisma that was undeniable. Tyler did not fit the simple stereotype of a bigoted person. He was a leader of men who understood that the prison was a kingdom that required a steady hand to rule. For a time, Michael continued to do his own thing, watching from the periphery as the Brotherhood operated with a sophisticated, quiet efficiency. He saw that they lived better than the other inmates. They had substances, they had clothes, and they had a sense of order that resonated with his own desire for control. Most importantly, he saw that they controlled their environment. They were not victims of the prison. They were its masters. The recruitment of Michael Thompson was a slow and measured process, a courtship of respect rather than a campaign of fear. Tyler knew that a man who joins out of fear will betray you when the fear is removed, but a man who joins out of respect will stand with you until the end. By 1977, the Aryan Brotherhood had become a powerful, interlocking structure within the California system, and Tyler held the keys to its most exclusive inner circle. To join, one had to be sponsored and recommended, and usually one had to perform work, a rhythmic euphemism for the targeted violence that maintained the gang's reputation. Tyler sought only those who could help produce the fear and intimidation necessary to keep the machinery of the Brotherhood running. Eventually, the pressure of the yard and the undeniable gravity of Tyler's presence drew Michael in. He realized that in a world of wolves, one must eventually choose a pack, and there was no pack more disciplined or more respected than the one led by the Hulk. His entry into the Brotherhood was not a surrender, but an alliance. He became Tyler's right-hand man, the strategist to Tyler's force, a partnership that would balance the raw, elemental power of the leader with the quiet, observant intelligence of the protege. They became the face of the organization, two men who could walk through the yard of Old Folsom and feel the air part before them. Tyler's physical prowess remained unparalleled during these years. He was extremely well built, his muscles a testament to a lifetime of lifting the chantier, heavy weights of the yard and the even heavier weights of responsibility. He was a skilled combatant who moved with a clinical, heavy-hearted speed that left no room for error. When Tyler spoke of the Brotherhood, he spoke of it as a family, a tribe that stood outside the laws of the state and the common morality of the world. He taught Michael that violence was not just an act, but a currency, the number one currency in a place where nothing else mattered. If you controlled the violence, you controlled the substances, the illegal trade, the loan sharking, and the very breath of every man in the cell block. As the two men stood together in the shadow of the Folsom Towers, the Brotherhood was evolving into something the likes of which had never been seen in the American prison system. They were moving beyond the simple defensive alliance of the 60s and into a period of aggressive corporate expansion. They were in business, and business was booming. Tyler ensured that every member of the AB was a big boy, a veteran of the yard who could be trusted to carry out the commission's orders without hesitation. The meeting of Bingham and Thompson was the catalyst for this growth, the union of the old guard's strength and the new guard's ambition. The atmosphere of 1977 was one of gathering storms. The one man, one vote system remained in place, but Tyler's influence was such that his voice often carried the weight of the entire commission. He had established himself through a decade of loss and iron, and now, with Michael at his side, he was ready to test the limits of his empire. They lived as kings among the damned, their cells better furnished, their food better prepared, and their word more powerful than any decree from the warden's office. They had built a society that mirrored the one outside, but without its lies. A world where power was visible and consequence was immediate. As this chapter of their union closes, we see Tyler and Michael standing at the edge of the yard, the sun dipping low and casting long, rhythmic shadows across the asphalt. They have found in each other a mirror of their own strength, a brotherhood that transcends the steel and the stone. But the peace of their new alliance is a fragile thing, for the yard is a restless creature that always demands fresh blood. The signal for the next engagement is already being prepared in the silence of the tears, a clash that will turn the dust of Folsom into a river of crimson foam. The partnership of the Hulk and his right hand has been forged, and the foundations of the Brotherhood have never been more secure. But far to the south, the gates of San Quentin are waiting, and the violence they have mastered in Folsom is about to be unleashed on a scale that will make the gods of Olympus tremble. For now, the two men turn back toward the cell blocks, their footsteps echoing in the quiet of the evening, while the first notes of a war cry begin to whisper through the iron bars of the night. In the hidden world behind the wire, there is no gold, no silver, and no paper debt that carries the weight of a man's life. There is only the currency of violence, and its value never fluctuates. In the year 1978, within the granite walls of Old Folsom, this currency reached a fever pitch, a moment where the slow, steady accumulation of tribal tension finally overflowed into the physical world. For Tyler Davis Bingham and his right hand, Michael Thompson, the air of the yard had grown thick and heavy, like the atmosphere before a great summer storm. They moved through the tears with a measured, rhythmic certainty, knowing that the time for words had passed and the time for the ritual of the blood had arrived. In this place, violence was not an eruption of chaos, but a calculated transaction, a way to balance the ledgers of power in a society that recognized no other law. The morning of the great engagement began like any other, with the distant metallic clanging of cell doors and the low echoing murmur of thousands of men waking to another day of stone and iron. But beneath the surface of the routine, a pre-agreed upon signal was moving through the Brotherhood like a slow burning fuse. In the yard, the divisions were as clear as the lines of a map. The Black Guerrilla family and their allies moved to one end of the dust, their shadows long and sharp in the early light. At the other end stood the Aryan Brotherhood and the Mexican mafia, an alliance of convenience and commerce that had turned the yard into a checkerboard of lethal intent. There was a stillness in the air, a silence so profound that one could almost hear the heartbeat of the prison itself, waiting for the first move. When the signal was finally given, it was not a shout, but a shift in the collective gravity of the men. They began to merge toward the center of the yard, a slow and rhythmic convergence of two opposing tides. This was the titanomachy of the high-walled world, a clash of bodies and steel that tore across the dust with a fury that felt as old as time. In the center of this storm stood Tyler Davis Bingham. He did not rush or flail. He moved with the clinical, heavy-hearted efficiency of a man who had mastered the geometry of combat. His physical prowess was unparalleled, his muscles acting as a shield against the blades of his enemies, while his own hands worked with a terrifying, measured speed. The engagement quickly became a scene of great loss, a visceral manifestation of the blood-in, blood-out decree that governed their lives. Tyler never allowed anyone to live when the stakes reached this level of finality. To engage an individual was to seek their conclusion, and he did so with a swiftness that was as shocking as it was silent. He believed that to leave a rival alive was to leave a debt unpaid. And in the economy of the yard, Tyler was a man who demanded a balanced book. The crimson foam began to rise upon the asphalt, a dark and heavy liquid that pooled in the depressions of the yard, reflecting the indifferent blue of the California sky. It was a scene of visceral reality, where the only sound was the rhythmic thud of impact and the heavy, labored breathing of men pushed to the absolute limit of their mortality. Michael Thompson stood at Tyler's back, a witness and a participant in the unfolding carnage. He saw how the yard transformed from a place of exercise and sunlight into a battlefield of iron and shadow. The violence was so extensive, so complete, that the administration was forced to take measures that felt more like a response to a natural disaster than a prison riot. They brought a fire truck out onto the yard, the great mechanical beast rumbling across the dust, its hoses unleashing a powerful, rhythmic torrent of water to wash the blood away. The water turned pink as it mixed with the crimson foam, flowing toward the drains in a steady, hypnotic stream, a literal cleansing of the ledger that left the asphalt dark and glistening in the afternoon sun. For Tyler, this engagement was the final proof of his leadership. He had led from the front, his own blood mixing with that of his enemies, and he had emerged as the undisputed king of the yard. The big boys of the other gangs looked on with a new level of respect, or perhaps a new level of fear, recognizing that the Brotherhood under Tyler's command was no longer a defensive clique, but a professional organization of warriors. The cost of this victory was high. Men were wheeled away on gurneys, their stories ending in the quiet white rooms of the infirmary. But for those who remained, the order of the yard had been clarified. The currency of violence had been spent, and the Brotherhood now held the largest share of the market. In the days that followed, the atmosphere of Old Folsom shifted into a period of heavy, guarded silence. The administration, upset by the scale of the injuries and the sheer audacity of the engagement, moved with a deliberate hand to separate the architects of the violence. They recognized that as long as Tyler Davis, Bingham, and Michael Thompson stood together in the yard of Folsom, the prison would remain a war zone. The decision was made to transfer them, to kick them out of the granite fortress and move them to a place they believed might better contain their influence. But the state did not understand that a man like Tyler carries his empire within him. He does not need a specific set of walls to rule, only the breath in his lungs and the loyalty of his kin. The transfer was a slow process, a rhythmic series of bus rides and chain-link handoffs that moved the two leaders through the landscape of the California penal system. They left behind the 5 tiers of Folsom, with its iconic guard tower and its century of ghosts, and turned their eyes toward the edge of the bay. Their destination was San Quentin, the oldest prison in the state, a place that was already falling apart under the weight of its own overcrowded history. If Folsom was a cathedral of stone, San Quentin was a labyrinth of iron and salt air, a place where the cells were smaller and the shadows were deeper. As Tyler and Michael prepared for this new chapter, they reflected on the blood that had been spilled on the Folsom yard. They knew that the blood in, blood out code was the only thing that gave their lives structure in a world designed to strip it away. Tyler remained the steady, unyielding center of the organization, his mind already calculating the blind spots and the business opportunities of the new facility. He understood that violence was a tool, but business was the goal. The Brotherhood was in the trade of power, and whether they were in the granite of the mountains or the salt of the bay, the trade remained the same. The reputation of the Hulk preceded him to San Quentin. The inmates there had heard of the 1978 scene of loss, of the fire trucks on the yard, and of the man who moved through combat like a force of nature. They waited with a mix of anticipation and dread, knowing that the arrival of Bingham and Thompson would fundamentally alter the balance of power. The gangs of San Quentin, the Mexican mafia, the Black Guerrilla family, and the smaller cliques began to consolidate their ranks, preparing for the arrival of the 2 men who had turned Old Folsom into a river of red. Inside the transportation bus, the rhythmic sound of the tires on the pavement served as a countdown to their arrival. Tyler sat in silence, his burly frame filling the narrow seat, his eyes fixed on the passing landscape of the outside world, a world he would likely never walk as a free man again. He did not mourn the loss of Folsom. He only looked towards the next engagement. He knew that the currency of violence was universal, and that in the small, cramped cells of San Quentin, he would find new ways to spend it. He was a product of the state, a warrior who had been refined by the state's own efforts to break him, and he was ready to test the foundations of the oldest prison in the West. As the bus crested the hill and the grey walls of San Quentin came into view, the air changed, smelling of salt and decay. The gates opened with a slow, mechanical groan, welcoming the two men into a new maze of iron and shadow. They had survived the granite of the north, and now they were to face the crumbling labyrinth of the bay. The Brotherhood was with them, its reach extending through the coded letters and the whispered oaths that connected every cell block in the state. Tyler Davis Bingham, the commissioner of the Iron Shadow, was stepping onto a new stage, and the history he was about to write would be darker and more permanent than anything that had come before. The move to San Quentin was intended to be a punishment, a way to isolate the problem inmates from their power base. But for the Brotherhood, it was an expansion. They were moving into the heart of the system, into the place where the most violent and sophisticated offenders were gathered. Tyler saw not a cage, but an opportunity. He saw a city of 5,000 souls waiting to be organized, a marketplace waiting to be controlled, and a rival population waiting to be subdued. The silence of the bus was replaced by the chaotic noise of the San Quentin intake, a rhythmic cacophony of shouting, clanging, and the heavy thud of boots on concrete. In the year 1979, the state moved its most difficult souls to the edge of the bay, to San Quentin, a place of blind spots and salt-eroded stone, where the air tastes of the Pacific and the history of 1,000 transgressions. To arrive at San Quentin is to enter a world that feels as though it is slowly dissolving. The constant moisture of the San Francisco Bay gnawing at the iron and the concrete until everything feels heavy, damp, and ancient. It was here that Tyler Davis Bingham and Michael Thompson were sent, a move intended by the administration to act as a cooling agent, a way to stifle the fires they had lit in the granite halls of Folsom. But as the heavy gates of the Bayside fortress closed behind them, it became clear that the state had not moved them to a place of isolation, but rather to the very heart of the storm. San Quentin was not just a prison. It was ground zero for the gathered power of every major gang in the West. A labyrinth of narrow corridors and crowded tiers where the darkness was deeper and the stakes were infinitely higher. San Quentin in the late 1970s was a structure falling apart under the weight of its own crowded history. The architecture was a cramped and suffocating contrast to the verticality of Folsom. Here, the cells were so narrow that a man could reach out his arms and touch wall to wall with the simple extension of his elbows. It was a space designed to shrink the spirit, to compress a man's world until it was nothing more than a few square feet of damp stone. The prison was a small, teeming city, housing a transient population that fluctuated between 3,000 and 5,000 souls, all packed into a facility built for a fraction of that number. In such an environment, the scent of the world is inescapable, a thick, rhythmic soup of salt air, sweat, and the faint, metallic tang of aging iron. It was a place where privacy was a myth, and the constant presence of others became a rhythmic pressure against the mind. Within this maze of overcrowded tiers, the geography of power was defined by the blind spots. Because of the prison's aging design and the haphazard additions made over the decades, there were numerous areas where the tower officers, perched high with their long-reach instruments, could not see. These were the shadows where the secret history of San Quentin was written. It was in these blind spots that the perforations occurred, where the business of the gangs was conducted in hushed, measured tones, and where the leaders of the Brotherhood met to map out the future of their empire. Tyler Davis Bingham, with his long memory and his patient heart, moved through these shadows with the ease of a man who had mastered the terrain. He did not see the blind spots as a lack of authority, but as a gift of space, a territory where the iron shadow could grow undisturbed by the unblinking eye of the state. The arrival of the Hulk and his right hand immediately altered the equilibrium of the Bayside fortress. San Quentin was already home to the major gang leaders and the most problematic inmates in the California system, creating a concentration of volatile energy that felt like a permanent vibration in the air. The Aryan Brotherhood, the Mexican Mafia, the Black Guerrilla family, and the Black Panthers all vied for control of the limited resources within the walls. But the Brotherhood, now guided by the experience of Folsom, operated with a new level of administrative discipline. They were no longer just a group of men defending a corner of the yard. They were a corporate entity. They understood that in a city of 5,000, the most valuable commodity was control. Control over the substances, the loan sharking, and the movement of goods that made the slow crawl of time bearable. Violence at San Quentin was a business as usual affair, a rhythmic interruption to the monotony of the day. When an inmate was struck down, the yard would be briefly shut down, the sirens wailing their mournful, measured cry. The victim would be wheeled out on a gurney, their blood a dark contrast to the grey asphalt, and then, with clinical efficiency, the facility would be reactivated. Within an hour, the lines would be moving again, the mess hall would be serving its grey meals, and the business of the gangs would resume as if nothing had happened. Tyler watched this cycle with a detached, professional eye. He understood that in the economy of the Bay, life was merely a decimal point in a larger calculation of power. He ensured that the Brotherhood's interests were protected, using the blind spots of the prison to enforce a discipline that the guards could never match. The overcrowding of San Quentin in those years created a unique and dangerous alchemy. Men were pushed together in the heat of the summer and the damp of the winter, their frustrations building into a low-frequency hum that could snap into violence at the slightest provocation. But for the Brotherhood, this overcrowding was a resource. It provided a constant stream of new recruits, young men who were overwhelmed by the chaos of the tiers and who sought the stability and the order that the Iron Shadow provided. Tyler and Michael acted as the anchors in this sea of unrest. They were the veteran convicts, the men who had survived the worst the state could offer and who carried themselves with a quiet, unshakable dignity. To a frightened young arrival, the sight of Tyler's burly frame and calm demeanor was more convincing than any rule book or warden's speech. Business for the Brotherhood was booming in the salt air of the bay. They controlled the flow of contraband through a sophisticated network of payoffs and intimidation, ensuring that their members were always better dressed, better fed, and better supplied than the general population. They utilized the transient nature of the prison, using the constant movement of inmates in and out of the facility to spread their messages and their influence to other parts of the state. The kite system, the small rhythmic notes passed from hand to hand, reached a peak of efficiency at San Quentin. Messages would move from the upper tiers of North Block to the depths of the adjustment center in a matter of minutes. A shadow postal service that operated beneath the very feet of the patrolling guards. Tyler's role in this empire was that of a quiet sovereign. He spent much of his time in his small cell, a space he had transformed into a center of administrative power. From within those narrow walls, he orchestrated the movement of the gang, his word moving through the tiers like a slow-burning fuse. He did not need to be on the yard to be felt. His presence was woven into the very fabric of the prison. When he did walk out into the sunlight, it was a measured event. He would stand at the edge of the asphalt, the wind from the bay ruffling his clothes, and watch the rhythmic motion of the inmates with the eyes of a man who owned the ground beneath his feet. He was the Hulk, the silent leader who had turned a punishment transfer into a strategic victory. The relationship between the gangs and the administration at San Quentin was a complex dance of necessity and neglect. The guards were chronically understaffed, often with a single officer responsible for 70 or 80 men in a high-tension environment. This imbalance created a vacuum that the gangs were only too happy to fill. In many ways, the Brotherhood provided a form of order that the state could not, enforcing a set of rules and consequences that were immediate and absolute. Tyler understood this dynamic and manipulated it to his advantage, ensuring that as long as the Brotherhood's business was undisturbed, the tiers remained relatively stable. But beneath this surface of order, the violence remained the primary currency, a debt that was always waiting to be collected in the blind spots of the stone. As the bay fog rolled in during the evenings, swallowing the iconic towers and the high walls in a grey, rhythmic shroud, the prison felt even more like a world apart. The sound of the foghorns on the bay would drift through the bars, a haunting reminder of a world that continued to move and breathe just beyond the reach of the inmates. Inside, the rhythmic clanging of the night count and the low murmur of 1,000 conversations created a soundscape of confinement. Tyler would sit in the dark of his cell, the salt air damp against his skin, and plan for the next expansion of the iron shadow. He knew that the state would soon move him again, seeking once more to break the influence he had built. But he also knew that the stone and the iron were the same everywhere. San Quentin had been intended as a place of containment for the problem inmates, but it had instead become a training ground for the next generation of the Brotherhood. The lessons learned in the blind spots and the narrow cells of the bay would soon be exported to the federal system, creating a nationwide reach that the architects of the prison could never have imagined. Tyler Davis Bingham was no longer just a prisoner of California. He was becoming an architect of a much larger, darker destiny. He had mastered the granite of Folsom and the salt of San Quentin, and he was ready for the absolute silence of the mountain that was yet to come. There are moments when the body transcends its mortal limits, where muscle and bone become as dense as the oak of an ancient ship, shielding the spirit from a storm of lead and iron. In the humid, heavy air of San Quentin, such a moment arrived for Tyler Davis Bingham and Michael Thompson, a physical testament to the sheer mass of their resolve. It was an event that defied the common laws of biology, born in the friction between rival powers in a place where the sun struggles to pierce the morning fog. This was the moment where the iron shadow was nearly extinguished, not by a blade in a dark corridor, but by the overwhelming force of the state itself, raining down from above in a rhythmic burst of fire and heat. They had been in San Quentin for little more than a week, and already the delicate balance of the yard was beginning to fray. The arrival of the Hulk and his right hand had acted as a catalyst, stirring the deep-seated rivalries that lay dormant in the salt air of the bay. Tension had flared with the Mexican Mafia, a group that had long shared an uneasy commercial peace with the Brotherhood. An associate of the Aryan Brotherhood had been struck down, a rhythmic message of defiance carved into his skin. Tyler and Michael, understanding that in this world, a slight unanswered is a territory lost, moved to the yard with a deliberate and heavy purpose. They carried no knives, no sharpened steel, no hidden shivs. They carried only the weight of their own hands and the momentum of their history. The engagement was sudden and visceral. In the open space of the yard, where the asphalt was damp with the morning mist, the two leaders descended upon their rivals. It was not a chaotic brawl, but a systematic application of force, a rhythmic dismantling of the opposition that left the other inmates paralyzed in a mix of awe and terror. Tyler moved with a clinical, heavy-handed speed, his burly frame absorbing the strikes of his enemies as if they were nothing more than insects against a stone wall. Michael stood beside him, his movements precise and observant, a partnership of force and strategy that seemed for a moment to be untouchable. But the state, perched in its high towers, was watching. A guard, stationed in a long-reach tower a mere 12 feet above the ground, looked down upon the violence. This was not a distant observer, but a man close enough to see the sweat on their brows and the steam rising from their skin. He leaned over the rail, his instrument heavy in his hands, and began to engage. He was an expert marksman, his movements rhythmic and certain as he pumped the lead into the air. He was so close that if he had reached out, he might have touched them. He targeted the two leaders, the center of the storm, and he did not miss. Tyler and Michael both took 5 rounds in the back, the heavy lead buckshot tearing through their clothing and burying itself deep into their flesh. In any other men, such a barrage would have been final. A rhythmic thud of bodies hitting the pavement and the slow, silent exit of the spirit. The lead was so hot, it was described as unbearable, a burning sensation that felt as if the sun itself had been pressed against their spines. Yet, they did not fall. They did not even slow their assault until the sheer heat of the metal became a physical barrier they could no longer ignore. They stopped, not because their spirits failed, but because the lead had reached a temperature that challenged the very composition of their being. This event, rather than breaking the spirit of the Brotherhood, served to solidify its legend. It was whispered in the shadows of North Block and the depths of the adjustment center that the Hulk could not be ended by lead, that his skin was as thick as the granite of Folsom. It gave the gang a mythic quality, a sense of invincibility that attracted the most desperate and the most violent of the new arrivals. Tyler sat in the quiet of the infirmary, the salt air of the bay cooling his wounds, and reflected on the fragility of power. He realized that while his body was a fortress, the state possessed a fire that could always find a way in. It was a lesson in the limits of physical force and the necessity of a much more subtle and far-reaching kind of control. Despite the violence of the encounter, the aftermath was not an all-out war between the Brotherhood and the Mexican Mafia. Both organizations understood that while blood is the currency of respect, money is the currency of survival. They were allies in commerce, partners in the lucrative trade of substances and influence that moved through the San Quentin tiers like a hidden river. To go to war was to interrupt the business, to stop the flow of profit that made the slow crawl of years bearable. They met in the blind spots of the prison, their leaders speaking in measured diplomatic tones, and decided to put the incident behind them. In the economy of the yard, green was the only color that truly mattered, and the Shah, group-specific ideologies they preached, were often set aside for the sake of the ledger. The doctor who treated Tyler watched him with a mix of professional curiosity and growing dread. He saw a man who had transformed his own biology into a weapon of war, a man whose very cells seemed to have adapted to the environment of the cage. The healing process was slow and rhythmic, a daily ritual of cleaning wounds and changing bandages in the sterile, low-frequency hum of the infirmary. Tyler remained silent throughout his recovery, his eyes fixed on the narrow window that looked out toward the bay. He was not a man who felt pain in the way others did. He felt only the delay of his plans, the temporary interruption of his work. As he recovered, the Aryan Brotherhood continued to grow in the shadows of San Quentin. The organization was evolving, becoming more sophisticated, more detached from the raw violence of the yard. They began to recruit individuals who had never been to California, men who had been convicted of federal crimes and who carried the Brotherhood's influence into the nationwide system. Tyler watched this expansion from his bed, his mind working with the same steady, deliberate pace that his body used to heal. He knew that the state would soon move him again, perhaps further away this time. But he also knew that the Brotherhood was no longer just a collection of men. It was an idea, a dark and permanent truth that could not be concluded by lead or fire. The incident with the Tower Guard became a part of the secret history of San Quentin, a story told to every new guard and every new inmate as a warning. It spoke of the power of the Brotherhood and the resilience of its leaders. It reminded the administration that while they held the keys and the instruments, they did not truly own the spirits of the men in the tiers. Tyler and Michael eventually returned to the general population, their backs scarred, but their authority absolute. They walked the yard with a new kind of silence, the silence of men who had faced the fire of the state and returned to tell the tale. The salt air of the bay continued to gnaw at the walls of the prison, a rhythmic and invisible erosion that mirrored the slow, steady decay of the old order. Tyler Davis Bingham, the commissioner of the Iron Shadow, stood at the edge of the asphalt and looked out toward the horizon. He was 34 years old, a man who had spent the majority of his life behind bars, and yet he felt as if he were only just beginning. The muscle and the lead were now a part of him, a fusion of man and metal that would carry him through the darker days that were to come. As this chapter of the Salt and the Lead draws to a close, we see Tyler standing in the gloom of the San Quentin afternoon, his burly shoulders unmoving as the fog rolls in from the sea. The scars on his back are a map of a journey that is far from over, a journey that will take him into the absolute silence of the home, mountain, and the secret ink of the federal system. The Brotherhood is strong, its foundations built on the bone and the lead of its leaders, and the trade of power continues its rhythmic and lethal dance. But the world outside is calling, and for a brief moment, Tyler will walk in the sunlight of Texas, attempting once more to escape the shadow that has defined his life. For a brief window in 1981, the Iron Shadow receded, and Tyler Davis Bingham walked out from the salt-eroded gates of San Quentin into the vast, blinding sunlight of the free world. It was a rare interlude in a life measured by the rhythmic clanging of steel, a moment where the heavy gravity of the prison system seemed to lose its grip on his soul. He did not look back at the grey walls or the screaming gulls of the bay. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the wide, open horizons of Texas, a land of wood, oil, and the quiet promise of a life that did not require a sharpened blade to sustain. For those who watched him depart, it felt like a mythic departure, the warrior laying down his shield to walk among the fields of his ancestors, seeking a peace that had eluded him since the age of 9. Tyler's arrival in the Texas oil fields was marked by a quiet, industrious dignity. He sought work on the oil rigs, those towering skeletal titans of iron that rise from the dusty earth to drink from the ancient depths. To a man built of muscle and silence, the rhythmic, heavy labor of the rigs was a familiar comfort. The mechanical thud of the drill and the smell of raw earth and grease felt like a translation of the prison's industry into a language of productivity. He moved among the crews as a man of few words, his burly frame and scarred back earning him a natural respect that required no intimidation. In the heat of the Texas sun, the lead and the stone of his past seemed to melt away, replaced by the honest sweat of a man earning his keep in the light of day. During this interlude, Tyler found a different kind of brotherhood, the quiet, steady companionship of a family. He fell in love with a woman who saw beyond the tattoos and the hard edges of his history, seeing instead a man who was weary of the war. They built a home together, a place of soft wood and evening shadows where the only count that mattered was the one at the dinner table. Tyler formally adopted 2 of his partner's children, assuming the role of father with a measured, deliberate care that surprised those who only knew him as the Hulk. He sat with them in the quiet hours of the evening, his large, scarred hands holding their small ones, a physical bridge between the violence of his youth and the potential of their future. Together, they had a 3rd child, a new life born into the sunlight, far from the iron bars of California. For 4 years, the cycle of the seasons replaced the cycle of the yard. Tyler became a creature of the earth, his mind occupied by the price of oil and the needs of his household. He attended school plays and walked the dusty roads of his neighborhood, a man attempting to rewrite his own destiny through the sheer force of will. But beneath this surface of domestic peace, the iron shadow was not concluded. It was merely dormant. While he was paroled, Tyler remained a full-fledged member of the Aryan Brotherhood, a commissioner whose clout within the organization did not vanish simply because he was no longer within the walls. Communication with the prisoners was difficult in those years, conducted through coded letters and the occasional whispered message from a traveling associate. But Tyler's name remained a pillar of the gang's hierarchy. He was a man who could do whatever he wanted, and the Brotherhood waited in the silence of the tears, knowing that their king was merely on a long leave of absence. The psychological weight of a lifetime of incarceration is a gravity that few can truly escape. Tyler had spent his formative years in the dark cells of the youth authority, and the normalization of the criminal path was woven into the very fabric of his brain. To a man who has learned that the world is a series of transactions settled by force, the slow rewards of the oil fields can sometimes feel like a thin and unsatisfying broth. The need for wealth, for the quick and decisive gain that the Brotherhood celebrated, began to gnaw at the edges of his peace. Despite the love of his family and the stability of his work, the old patterns began to re-emerge, like cracks appearing in a dam that has held back a river for far too long. In 1985, the interlude came to a sudden and rhythmic end. Tyler Davis Bingham walked into a bank, not as a father or a laborer, but as a ghost of his former self. He carried a device, the cold steel of familiar weight in his palm. With a measured, terrifying calmness, he pointed the instrument at the clerk, the barrel sliding beneath the protective glass like a silent messenger of ruin. He made off with $12,000, a sum that was both significant and tragically small compared to the life he was about to lose. He was arrested 2 days later, the law finding him as easily as if he had never left their sight. The sentencing was swift, 25 years in the federal system. The experiment of the sunlight had failed, and the iron shadow returned to claim its own. The transition from the Texas sun to the federal cages of Lompoc, California, was a return to a familiar reality. When Tyler arrived at the gates of Lompoc, he was 38 years old, a man who had tasted the world and found it wanting. He was not met with the cold indifference of a new inmate. He was welcomed with open arms by the Aryan Brotherhood, who had already established a powerful presence within the federal system. They saw in his return a sign of strength, a homecoming of the leader who had survived the outside and returned to the only kingdom that truly mattered. Tyler did not mourn the loss of his family or the oil rigs. He simply stepped back into the role he had been born to play. He was made a commissioner of the federal branch instantaneously, his foot touching the yard and his authority settling over the tiers like a heavy grey cloak. The Aryan Brotherhood was evolving during this period, seeking a more rigid and organized structure to manage its growing influence. They decided to establish a commission of 3 leaders who would hold the power of life and the conclusion over the membership, deciding who was allowed into the circle and who was marked for the finality of the blade. Tyler was the natural choice for this triumvirate. His reputation from Folsom and San Quentin, combined with his recent history of bank robbery, made him a figure of mythic proportions. He did not lead through committee or debate. If Tyler said a thing needed to happen, the commission voted his way. He was the anchor of their new corporate order, a man whose silence was a decree and whose presence was a law. But Tyler was not a man who wished to rule from a distance. He needed to prove that the 4 years in the sunlight had not softened the iron in his veins. Shortly after his arrival at Lompoc, he learned of an individual named Gary Evilsizer, who had been marked by the gang for a past transgression. Tyler did not delegate the task to a younger initiate. He took the prison-made shank into his own hands. He approached the man with a rhythmic, clinical intent and perforated him over a dozen times. It was a visceral reassertion of his identity. The Hulk had returned, and he was as lethal as the day he had left San Quentin. Evil Caesar survived the assault through a miracle of medicine, but the message was sent. The interlude of peace was over, and the era of the Commission had begun. The administration of the Bureau of Prisons watched this return to violence with a mix of frustration and alarm. They believed that by moving Tyler into the federal system, far from his California power base, they might break the influence of the Brotherhood. But they did not understand the nature of the Iron Shadow. It was not a local phenomenon, but a nationwide brotherhood of the damned, connected by the same secret ink and the same ancient oaths. Every time the law adjusted to their methods, the Commission adjusted in turn, refining their codes and their communications until the walls became transparent to their will. Tyler sat in his cell at Lompoc, the air no longer smelling of Texas oil, but of the sterile, metallic scent of the federal cage. He reflected on the children he had adopted and the life he had tried to build. He knew that he would likely never hold them again, that the 25-year sentence was merely the first layer of a much deeper, more permanent burial. But he felt no regret, only a steady, rhythmic acceptance of his fate. He was a product of the state, a man whose history was written in the ledgers of the Youth Authority and the tears of Folsom. He was back where he belonged, at the head of the snake, guiding his brothers through the darkness toward a new and more absolute kind of power. The state, however, was preparing its own response. Angered by the assault of Evil Caesar and the growing reach of the Commission, they made the decision to move Tyler to a place designed for the absolute containment of the human spirit. They would send him far from the coast, far from the sun of Texas, to the heart of the country where the silence was measured in inches of concrete. They believed that by isolating him, they could cut off the head of the Brotherhood once and for all. But Tyler only watched the gates open for his transfer with a calm, measured gaze, knowing that the Iron Shadow carries its own light into the darkest of pits. As this chapter of the failed sunlight closes, the dusty plains of Texas are a distant memory, a dream of wood and oil that has been swallowed by the grey reality of the cell. Tyler, Davis Bingham, is once again a prisoner of the state, but he is a prisoner who holds the keys to an empire. The saga of the Brotherhood is entering its most organized and lethal phase, and the Commissioner is ready to lead his people into the mountain of silence. The interlude is over, the blood has been spilled, and the long rhythmic night of the federal system is just beginning. The sun sets over the Lompoc perimeter, casting long, jagged shadows across the fencing, while in the silence of the transportation van, Tyler prepares for the journey to the east. He leaves behind the family he tried to love and the life he tried to lead, turning his heart back toward the stone and the iron that have always been his truest companions. The next war is already being mapped out in his mind, a war of secret ink and silent orders that will soon shake the foundations of the entire federal system. The Hulk is moving toward the heart of the country, and the mountain is waiting to hear his name. The federal government sought to break the snake by moving it to the vast, flat plains of Illinois, to United States Penitentiary Marion, a place conceived as the spiritual successor to Alcatraz, designed to hold the most volatile spirits in the land within a cage of absolute certainty. By the mid-1980s, the administration believed that by uprooting the leaders of the Iron Shadow from their Western foundations, they could finally achieve a silence that the California walls could not provide. But as Tyler Davis Bingham arrived at the gates of Marion, he did not find a place of isolation. Instead, he found a gathering of the high kings of the federal system. It was here, amidst the low-frequency hum of a facility designed for total control, that the Brotherhood transitioned from a regional force into a nationwide empire, spreading its wings across the heart of the country like a dark and patient bird of prey. United States Penitentiary. Marion was a monument to the evolution of the American cage. After the closure of Alcatraz, the government needed a new destination for the men who could not be contained by traditional means, and Marion was built to be that destination. It was the first supermax facility of the modern era, a place where the architecture was intended to be a physical deterrent to rebellion. The corridors were long and sterile, the lighting was artificial and constant, and the movement of the inmates was governed by a rhythmic, mechanical precision that sought to strip away the last vestiges of human agency. Yet, for Tyler, this environment was not a deterrent, but a refined laboratory for the exercise of power. He was moved there not as a student, but as a master of the system, a man who understood that the tighter the cage, the more valuable the space within it becomes. It was within the high-security tiers of Marion that Tyler Davis Bingham was reunited with another titan of the Brotherhood, a man named Barry Mills. Mills was already a legend within the federal system, a sharp-eyed and strategic leader who possessed a mind as cold and calculating as the steel that surrounded them. Tyler and Mills were already well acquainted, their paths having crossed in the California years. But in the isolation of Marion, their partnership matured into a formidable alliance. They were two of the three commissioners of the Aryan Brotherhood, the highest-ranking members of a shadow government that now looked beyond the borders of California. Together, they occupied a unique space in the prison hierarchy, two sovereigns sharing a single fortress, their eyes fixed on a map of the country that the state believed it had hidden from them. The meeting of Bingham and Mills was the catalyst for a fundamental reorganization of the Brotherhood. In the quiet hours of the lockup, they began to draft a new architecture for the gang, one that emphasized national recruitment and sophisticated organizational discipline. They realized that the federal system offered a much larger and more diverse population of potential soldiers than the California state prisons. They began to reach out to inmates who had never set foot in the West, men from the South, the Midwest, and the East Coast, who sought the protection and the identity that the Brotherhood offered. Under their guidance, the gang turned from a California prison group into a nationwide reach, a transformation that occurred with a steady, rhythmic inevitability. The recruitment process at Marion was a study in clinical assessment. Tyler and Mills were not looking for the impulsive or the weak. They were looking for men who could withstand the pressures of the federal system and remain loyal to the Iron Shadow. Every new member had to be sponsored, their background scrutinized with the same intensity as a military commission. To be invited into the circle was to be granted a new life, a sense of purpose in a place designed to eliminate it. Tyler was the physical anchor of this recruitment, his burly frame and his history of violence serving as the ultimate credential. He moved through the yard with a measured, deliberate grace, his presence a silent promise of the power that came with membership. As the Brotherhood expanded, so too did its sophistication. Tyler and Mills understood that to rule an empire from behind bars, one must master the art of communication. They refined the use of the kite and the secret ink, creating a system where orders could travel from Marion to the federal facilities in Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Kansas with a speed that defied the administration's efforts. They developed complex codes based on ancient languages, literature, and even the eyelid movements of Morse code to circumvent the heavy censorship of their mail. Tyler sat in his cell, the silence of the Illinois plains pressing against the walls, and wove a web of influence that made the physical distance between prisons irrelevant. He was no longer just a leader of men. He was a leader of information. The Bureau of Prisons viewed the concentration of leaders like Bingham and Mills as a way to cut off the head of the snake. But in reality, they had merely provided a central hub for the gang's most brilliant minds to collaborate. The isolation of Marion provided the commissioners with the one thing they lacked in the chaotic yards of California: time. They had nothing but time to conceive of ideas that would circumvent the authority imposed upon them. They studied the movements of the guards, the rotations of the staff, and the legal restrictions placed on their communication, finding the minute gaps where the Iron Shadow could breathe. It was a rhythmic and patient battle of wills, a contest between the state's desire for silence and the Commission's desire for dominion. Within the tiers of Marion, a new culture was born, one that balanced the raw, elemental violence of the past with a more administrative and calculating approach to power. The Brotherhood began to engage in conflicts not just for survival, but for the control of markets. They understood that the federal system was a multi-million-dollar economy of contraband, and they intended to hold the largest share. Tyler oversaw the enforcement of this economy, his reputation as the Hulk, ensuring that his decrees were met with immediate compliance. If a rival group interfered with the Brotherhood's business, the response was swift, rhythmic, and final. Violence remained the primary currency, but under Bingham and Mills, it was spent with a much more deliberate intent. The partnership between Tyler and Barry Mills was built on a foundation of mutual respect and a shared vision for the future of the gang. Mills was the strategist, the weaver of long-term plans, while Tyler was the enforcer, the man who grounded those plans in the physical reality of the yard. They were the most influential members of the commission, and their decisions carried the weight of destiny for thousands of men across the country. They lived as kings in the heart of the supermax silence, their cells better equipped, their food better prepared, and their word more powerful than any decree from Washington. They had turned the government's effort to isolate them into a strategic advantage, creating a central command for an empire that now spanned the continent. As the 1990s approached, the Brotherhood's reach had become truly nationwide. They were no longer a secret that could be contained within the walls of Folsom or San Quentin. They were a reality that haunted every federal facility in the United States, a shadow that moved behind the wire from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Tyler Davis Bingham, the boy from Sacramento who had once been a ward of the court, was now a commissioner of a sovereign nation of the damned. He had mastered the state, the federal, and the local systems, and he was preparing to move toward the final and most absolute stage of his journey. The move to Marion was intended to be the end of Tyler's influence, but it was instead the beginning of his true legacy. He had learned that the Iron Shadow is not a place, but a connection between people, a rhythmic, pulse-like energy that travels through the walls and across the miles. He sat in his cell, the artificial light reflecting off the sterile concrete, and felt the heartbeat of the Brotherhood thrumming in the distance. He was ready for the next turn of the wheel, for the move to the mountain where the silence would be absolute and the power would be invisible. To understand the empire of Tyler Davis Bingham, one must first understand the anatomy of a kite. In the lexicon of the yard, a kite is a small, tightly folded note, often no larger than a postage stamp, designed to be passed from hand to hand during the rhythmic movement of the lines or hidden within the gaps of the masonry. These notes were the nerves of the Brotherhood, carrying orders, warnings, and the slow, steady hum of business from one tier to the next. But as the administration grew more vigilant, the simple kite was no longer enough. The commissioners required a way to send messages that could survive the prying eyes of the guards and the heavy censorship of the mail. They required a way to write in the dark. The most common and effective method was the use of what the inmates called invisible ink, a technique that relied on the most basic and primal of materials. A prisoner would take a sheet of yellow legal paper and, using a sharpened matchstick or a piece of plastic, write their true message using their own urine. As the liquid dried, it vanished into the fibers of the paper, leaving no trace of the words that had been carved upon it. To the casual observer, the page appeared blank, or perhaps it contained a mundane, rambling letter about family, or weather written in standard ink. But when the party who received it held the paper over a steady heat source, light bulb, a radiator, or the brief rhythmic flame of a torch, the urine would scorch and darken. The secret words would rise from the page in a pale amber glow, revealing the truth that had been hidden in sight. Tyler Davis Bingham sat in the quiet of his cell, his burly frame bent over a yellow pad, practicing this ancient alchemy with the patience of a monk. He understood that a single letter, written in the secret ink, carried more weight than 1,000 shouts on the yard. It was via this mechanism that he maintained his grip on the Brotherhood's nationwide reach. He could sit in a maximum security facility in Illinois or Colorado and, with a few rhythmic strokes of a matchstick, order an engagement in Pennsylvania or a substance transaction in Georgia. This level of power did not exist in the world outside. It was a unique and terrifying phenomenon of the cage, where the absolute restriction of the body forced the mind to become infinitely more resourceful. The communication was multifaceted, a rhythmic layering of codes and subtexts that made the Brotherhood's mail nearly impossible to decipher. They used kites for internal movements, but for messages going to the street, they relied on the visitors who came to see them. These visitors, often family members or loyal associates, acted as living vessels for information. They would sit behind the thick glass, their voices filtered through a telephone, and speak in a language of riddles and domestic anecdotes that contained the coded instructions for the Brotherhood's external business. Tyler would watch them through the glass, his eyes calm and measured, as he passed the rhythmic signals that would keep his empire flourishing in the sunlight he could no longer touch. In addition to the secret ink and the visitors, the Brotherhood developed even more subtle ways to communicate. When even the paper was too dangerous, they turned to the body itself. It was said that a man could stand at the edge of his cell door and, using the rhythmic movement of his eyelids, send Morse code to a brother in the opposite tier. They learned to read the silence between words, to interpret the specific way a man walked across the yard, and to find meaning in the arrangement of items in a common area. Tyler was a master of these subtle cues. He understood that the prison was a sensory environment, and that every sound and every movement was a potential carrier of information. The sophistication of these methods reflected the intelligence of the men who designed them. Tyler Davis Bingham and Barry Mills were not merely brawlers. They were students of the system. They spent their hours of isolation conceiving ideas that would circumvent the authority imposed upon them. They looked at the rules of the Bureau of Prisons not as barriers, but as a set of parameters within which they could operate. If the mail was censored, they would find a way to write between the lines. If the visits were monitored, they would speak in tongues. It was a constant, rhythmic contest of wills, a game of shadow and light played out over decades of incarceration. The end order was the most lethal application of this secret language. It was often a brief, rhythmic sentence hidden within a long and innocuous letter. A note might speak of a cousin's health or a distant memory of a Texas oil rig, but hidden within the urine ink was a name and a location. When that letter reached its destination, the recipient would heat the paper, see the amber words, and know that the debt of the Brotherhood was due. This was how Tyler maintained the blood in, blood out decree across the entire federal system. He could reach out from his isolation and touch a man's life with the simple act of writing. It was a power born of silence, a rhythmic and invisible hand that moved through the steel and the stone without ever leaving a trace. As the years passed, the administration attempted to catch up with these methods. They used chemicals to test for invisible ink. They recorded every visit, and they monitored every kite that was intercepted. But for every measure the state took, the commission took two more. They changed their codes. They developed new inks from fruit juices or crushed aspirin, and they moved their communications through even more obscure channels. Tyler watched this struggle with detached professional amusement. He knew that as long as a man has a mind and the will to use it, no cage can ever be truly silent. The iron shadow was not made of walls. It was made of the connections between the men who lived within them. The art of the kite was also a way for the Brotherhood to maintain its culture and its history. They used the secret ink to pass down the stories of the old days, the legends of Folsom and San Quentin, and the names of the brothers who had fallen in the line of duty. It was a rhythmic and oral tradition transcribed onto the yellow legal pads of the federal system. Tyler was a keeper of this history, his own life a central thread in the tapestry of the gang. He understood that to lead a brotherhood, one must give them a story to believe in, and the secret ink was the ink of their mythology. In the mid-1990s, as Tyler moved toward the final fortress of ADX Florence, the communication system reached its zenith. He was now part of a commission that ruled with a corporate precision, their orders moving with the rhythmic certainty of a heartbeat. Even in the absolute isolation of the supermax, where the walls were thick and the contact was minimal, the kites continued to fly. Tyler sat in the Colorado gloom, his burly frame as unmoving as a statue, and watched the paper for the amber words that would tell him the state of his empire. He was the silent center of a nationwide web, a man who had turned the silence of the cell into a weapon of war. The saga of the Brotherhood is entering its most sophisticated and lethal phase, and the secret ink is the blood that keeps it alive. The Hulk has mastered the art of writing in the dark, and his will is moving through the steel and the stone with a rhythmic, invisible force. But the government is finally beginning to understand the nature of the kite, and a new kind of trial is looming on the horizon. A trial not of blades, but of words and evidence. For now, the amber light of the torch reveals the next order, and the iron shadow prepares for the final engagement. The silence is broken by the rhythmic scratching of a matchstick on a cell floor, and the mountain is listening. In the heart of the Colorado high desert, where the wind whispers through the jagged peaks and the earth feels ancient and immovable, there is a place designed to be the absolute end of all human connection. United States Penitentiary, Florence Administrative Maximum, the Supermax. It is a fortress of concrete and silence, a mountain within a mountain, where the air is filtered and the sunlight is metered out in narrow, vertical slivers that never touch the floor. When Tyler Davis Bingham was moved here in 1995, the federal government believed they had finally found the bottom of the well, a place where the head of the snake could be buried so deep that its breath would never again stir the air of the yard. But as the heavy, soundproof doors sealed him into a world of sensory deprivation, it became clear that the mountain had not swallowed the hulk. It had merely given him a new and more profound silence from which to rule. Within the silent chambers of Florence, Tyler managed to maintain a level of power that defied the very physics of the prison. The Bureau of Prisons had placed the leaders of the Brotherhood in this facility to sever their ability to order acts of violence. Yet communication remained the lifeblood of their empire. Even in the absolute dark of the Supermax, the kites continued to move. Tyler sat in the rhythmic stillness of his cell, his burly frame barely moving, as he utilized the secret language of the Brotherhood to reach beyond the concrete. He was no longer a man who needed to walk the yard to be felt. He had become a ghost in the machine, a presence that moved through the invisible ink and the coded letters that the sensors could not catch. It was during this period of intense isolation that a long simmering tension with another gang, the District of Columbia Blacks, reached a rhythmic and lethal peak. Conflict between the two groups had been a constant feature of the federal system, a series of ends and retaliations that moved back and forth like a pendulum of blood. In the year 1997, the Commission decided that the time for skirmishes had passed and the time for an all-out war had arrived. From within the most secure prison in the world, Tyler Davis Bingham prepared the order. It was a note written in the secret ink, attached to a letter that appeared to be nothing more than a mundane exchange of personal thoughts. But hidden beneath the surface was a two-word decree that would shake the foundations of the system. War with District of Columbia Blacks. The order moved from the Colorado mountains to United States Penitentiary Lewisburg in Pennsylvania with a steady, rhythmic certainty. When it arrived, the Brotherhood soldiers did not hesitate. The letter was revealed through heat, the amber words glowing with the authority of the Commission, and a nationwide race war within the federal system was ignited in a single afternoon. In Lewisburg, the violence was swift and clinical, resulting in two ends and multiple attempted perforations on that same day. This was the ultimate proof of Tyler's lethality, that a man locked in a soundproof room, watched by cameras and sensors, could still reach out and touch the lives of men thousands of miles away. It underscored a level of power that simply does not exist in the world of the sunlight. It was the power of the iron shadow at its most absolute. The state's reaction to the Louisburg War was one of profound alarm. They had believed that the supermax was the ultimate solution. Yet Tyler had demonstrated that as long as a man has a mind and a scrap of paper, he is never truly isolated. The administration began to tighten the restrictions even further, moving toward video visits and even more heavy-handed censorship of the mail. They realized that communication was not just a luxury for these men. It was their primary weapon. But Tyler and Mills were veterans of a 40-year contest of wills. They knew that when you have nothing else to do but sit in a cell and conceive of ways to circumvent authority, you will eventually find a gap in the armor. They began to use even more obscure methods, perhaps using the rhythmic blinking of their eyes or the specific phrasing of a legal document to pass their messages. The environment of the supermax created a unique psychological landscape. In the absence of sound and touch, the mind becomes hyper-attuned to the smallest details. Tyler lived in a world of low-frequency hums and the rhythmic clicking of electronic locks. He knew the exact timing of the guard rotations and the subtle shift in the air when the meal carts were approaching. He was a master of his own internal clock, maintaining a discipline that kept his spirit from eroding in the grey silence. He looked upon the other residents of the facility, the jihadists and the masterminds of global terror, as peers in a different kind of war. They were all inhabitants of the mountain, men whose influence was measured by the weight of their secrets. The war with the District of Columbia blacks served to further cement Tyler's status as a martyr and an icon within the Brotherhood. To the younger members scattered throughout the lower security facilities, the commissioners at Florence were like the old gods of Olympus, distant, powerful, and invisible. Their orders carried the weight of divine decree, and their continued survival in the face of the state's absolute pressure was a source of constant inspiration. Tyler was no longer just the Hulk. He was a symbol of the Brotherhood's resilience, a man who had mastered every cage the government could build. He sat in the Colorado gloom, his mind always looking toward the next moves on the board, while the iron shadow continued to grow in the world below. Communication among the Brotherhood at this level was a multifaceted and rhythmic discipline. They utilized every possible channel, from the legal mail that was protected by attorney-client privilege to the whispered words passed during the brief moments of outdoor exercise in the dog kennels, small, fenced-in cages where they could see the sky but never touch another human being. Tyler understood that the mountain was designed to swallow him, but he used the mountain as a megaphone, his silent orders echoing through the federal system with more clarity than a shout. The state had attempted to cut off the head of the snake, but they had instead created a command center that was nearly impossible to infiltrate. The isolation of the supermax also allowed for a deeper level of organizational planning. Tyler and Mills refined the Brotherhood's long-term goals, looking past the immediate violence of the Yard and toward a future where the gang functioned like a clandestine state. They established rules for succession and developed a more sophisticated understanding of the legal system, preparing for the day when the state would inevitably bring them to trial. Tyler was a student of the RICO statute, the federal law designed to dismantle organized crime, and he began to prepare his defenses with the same rhythmic patience he used for everything else. He knew that the government was building a case, and he intended to meet them with a mind that had been sharpened by years of absolute silence. As the late 90s gave way to the turn of the century, the Colorado Mountain remained the center of the Iron Shadow's world. The silence of the supermax was punctuated only by the distant, rhythmic rumble of thunder over the Rockies and the internal music of Tyler's own thoughts. He had found a way to live within the absolute dark, to find the light in the secret ink and the power in the quiet order. He was a man who had seen the beginning and the end of the system, and he was ready for the final engagement, the one that would move from the dark of the cell to the bright lights of a federal courtroom. The mountain holds its breath, the silence of the Colorado night pressing against the reinforced walls of Florence. Tyler prepares for the next journey, the one that will take him from the silence of the cell to the chaos of a trial that will determine the fate of the entire Brotherhood. He leaves behind the absolute dark and turns his heart toward the bright, unforgiving lights of the court, while the first notes of a new prophecy begin to whisper through the iron bars of the night. The saga of the Brotherhood is reaching its peak, and the Hulk is ready to stand as the final witness to the Iron Shadow's power. The final trial of the Iron Shadow was not fought with the rhythmic strike of a shiv or the heavy collision of bodies in a yard, but with millions of dollars and thousands of pages of federal law, bound together in a quiet, clinical attempt to dismantle an empire of the damned. In the year 2002, the federal government finally reached into the depths of the mountain at Florence to bring Tyler Davis Bingham and his cohorts into the light of a courtroom. They invoked the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, a legal statute originally forged to break the back of the shadow mob, now turned against the leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood. It was a confrontation of two different worlds: the world of the sunlight, with its gavels and robes, and the world of the shadow, where power is measured in secret ink and ancient oaths. Yet, as the proceedings began, it became clear that while the state could move the men, it could not so easily erase the myth they had built over 40 years of iron and stone. The government's primary objective was the ultimate finality, the extreme conclusion. They sought to use the RICO statute to prove a conspiracy of violence that reached across decades and continents, arguing that Bingham and Mills were the architects of a shadow state that functioned on endings and fear. But the prosecution of the Brotherhood proved to be a difficult and winding odyssey. Over the course of several years, as the legal battle moved through its rhythmic motions, the momentum of the state began to falter. Prosecutors changed, evidence was debated, and eventually, the decision was made to take the extreme conclusion off the table. For the Brotherhood, this was a victory of a different sort. The state had reached for the final blow and found its hand stayed by its own complexity. When the verdict finally arrived in November of 2006, Tyler Davis Bingham was convicted of violent crimes in aid of racketeering and ending a life, and he received a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. To the world of the sunlight, a life sentence for a man already serving life seemed like a failure, an expensive expenditure of resources that resulted in no tangible change. But in the world of the shadow, the outcome was interpreted differently. Tyler was returned to the absolute silence of the supermax at Florence, his status elevated from a mere prisoner to something approaching a saint or a martyr within the gang. He had faced the full weight of the federal government, and he had survived. He remained in his 6 by 12-foot cell, the concrete bed and the steel door once again becoming his entire universe. Though his direct power was restricted by the most heavy-handed censorship in the history of the system, his influence did not end. It became an atmospheric force, a quiet and permanent truth that younger inmates whispered about in the lower tiers of the federal map. The current reality of Tyler Davis Bingham is one of rhythmic and absolute isolation. He remains at ADX Florence, a man who is now an icon of a bygone era. To the new generation of inmates, he is the embodiment of the iron shadow, a man who spent 50 years in the cage and never bowed his head to the state. His daily life is a study in the persistence of the human spirit within a void. He is allowed only a brief window of exercise, 15 minutes a day in a fenced-in enclosure where he can see the Colorado sky but never touch the earth. The government remains confident that they have locked him down to the point where he can no longer interact with his people. But they also know that communication is a persistent and subtle thing. If Tyler Bingham were to walk out of his cell tomorrow, he would still be a threat, for the muscle of his body is always secondary to the muscle of his will. My feelings about the Brotherhood today are a mix of sorrow and disdain. It is a structure that influences young minds with a philosophy of prejudice, a philosophy born in the dark cells and the dark hearts of men who have been forgotten by the world. It is a tragedy that the lessons learned in the youth authority and the yards of Folsom are still being passed down, creating a cycle of violence that seems to have no end. Tyler Davis Bingham is the most dangerous kind of prisoner, not because of the fights he won, but because he mastered the art of leadership from the absolute bottom of the well. He showed that power does not require a throne. It only requires a name and the loyalty of those who believe in it. He is a man who has no compulsion against ending a life, a man for whom violence is the only natural law. The government believes they have solved the problem of Tyler Davis Bingham, but the history of the cage tells a different story. Every time the law thinks it has achieved silence, a new kite begins to fly, and a new secret is written in the dark. The Hulk may be locked in a soundproof room, but his story has already escaped the walls. It is a story of a boy from Sacramento who was raised by the state to be a warrior and who used the state's own iron to build a kingdom of the damned. He is a product of our history, a reflection of the darkness we choose to hide behind the high walls and the grey stone. The saga of the Iron Shadow concludes with a quiet and measured finality. Tyler Davis Bingham remains in the Colorado desert, his life a rhythmic loop of concrete and artificial light, while the world outside moves on into a new century. He has found his place in the absolute dark, and the mountain has finally swallowed his voice, if not his name. The saga is over, but the shadow remains, a permanent part of the landscape of those who dwell behind the wire. The trial is finished, the verdict is sealed, and the long, rhythmic night of the Supermax continues its steady and unchanging crawl. The story of the Hulk is at rest, but the Iron Shadow is a patient creature that knows how to wait in the dark. As the lights in the Supermax flicker one last time before the final count, the silence is broken only by the rhythmic breath of a man who has outlasted every cage they could build. The saga is complete, and the mountain holds its secrets well. The sun has now passed fully beneath the horizon of our story, leaving only the long, cooling shadows of history to settle over the landscape. As we move away from the iron gates and the grey towers of the American West, we find ourselves in a space of profound quiet, a place where the rhythmic clanging of the past fades into the gentle, steady pulse of the present moment. The journey we have taken through the life of Tyler Davis Bingham and the rise of the Iron Shadow is a heavy one, filled with the weight of stone and the cold certainty of steel. But now that weight is lifting. The air is growing lighter, the sounds are softening, and the world of the yard is being replaced by the soft, natural stillness of the night. In the high desert of Colorado, the mountain at Florence holds its breath. The jagged peaks of the Rockies are draped in shadows of indigo and violet, their ancient stone reflecting the cold light of the stars. This is the place where our story found its final, absolute silence. But even here, in the heart of the fortress, the earth remains at peace. Deep beneath the reinforced concrete, the ancient bedrock of the mountain remains unchanged, indifferent to the structures humans build upon its surface. There is a profound comfort in that permanence, a realization that the dramas of our lives are but a fleeting pulse against the slow, rhythmic heartbeat of the world. As you breathe in the cool, thin air of the mountain night, let go of the tension in your shoulders and the weight in your heart. trials are over. The verdicts have been read. The ledgers have been balanced and closed. There is nothing left for you to do but exist in this moment of absolute stillness. The iron shadow has receded into the archives of time, and you are here in the sanctuary of the present, where the only law is the rhythm of your own breath. The story of Tyler Davis Bingham has reached its conclusion, but your story is continuing in the soft, unwritten pages of sleep. You have mastered the history of the iron shadow, and now you are ready to master the silence. Let the weight of the concrete and the iron become as light as a feather, drifting down through the layers of consciousness until it touches the floor of your dreams and disappears. You are safe, you are at peace, and the mountain is whispering a long, measured good night. If you found comfort in this journey through the shadows of history, we invite you to become a permanent part of our community. By subscribing to this channel, you ensure that these measured, rhythmic stories will always be there to guide you into the quiet hours of the night. If there is someone in your life who struggles to find peace in the darkness, consider sharing this story with them, a gift of stillness in a world that is often too loud. But for now, do not think of the future. Do not think of the morning or the light. Stay here in the cool blue shadows of the mountain and listen to the final rhythmic breath of the night. The iron shadow is gone. The world is still, and you are finally absolutely free. Good night. Good night. Good night.